Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was the king of the Marines and fell in love with Tashigi and Hina? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sovereign of the Calm Belt. The silence was the most unnatural part. In the Grand Line, the sea was a constant cacophony of impossible weather and lunatic physics. Here, in the calm belt, the water was a sheet of polished obsidian. The air so heavy and still it felt like a wool blanket soaked in brine. The only sounds were the shriek of metal, the roar of cannon fire, and the guttural, wet tearing as the leviathans of the deep. The Sea Kings feasted on the wreckage of marine vessels. Vice Admiral Black Cage Hina stood on the bridge of her flagship, the full bind, a lit cigarette held between two long, elegant fingers. Her fuchsia suit jacket was pristine, a stark defiance against the chaos erupting around her. Her gaze, cool and sharp, swept across the naval battlefield. It was a disaster. 50 pirate ships, a veritable armada united under the blood-red banner of Gallows Grieg, a man with a reputation as brutish as his 9-figure bounty. They shouldn't have been able to get this far. They shouldn't have been able to move with this speed. Report, she snapped, her voice cutting through the nervous energy on the bridge. A young ensign, his face pale, flinched. Vice Admiral, Th. Iron hulls. They're lined with some kind of refined sea prism stone plating. It's not just negating devil fruit powers, it's masking their presence from the Sea Kings. They're ignoring the pirate fleet and targeting us exclusively. Hina took a slow drag from her cigarette, the ember glowing like a furious, miniature star. Of course, it was the only explanation. An elegant, brutal solution. It mean, Grieg had a benefactor with technology that rivaled Vegapunk's. Damage to the fleet. We've lost 12 vessels, ma'am. 7 more are dead in the water. The pirate vanguard has broken our line. They're making a run for the full bind. She could see it. 3 of Grieg's heaviest cruisers, bristling with cannons, were carving a path through the water, ignoring the desperate broadsides from her remaining escorts. They knew the rules of this game. Cut off the head and the body would fall. Her black cages, the very source of her epithet, were useless against ships. Her power was for men, not for cannonballs and reinforced steel. Hina is very disappointed, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. She had requested reinforcements an hour ago. G5, G2, anyone. The response had been a chilling static. This was supposed to be a simple containment action, a mop-up of escapees from an impelled-down transport. It had turned into a slaughter. The ship shuddered violently as a volley of cannonballs found their mark. Sparks rained from the ceiling. A lieutenant shouted, "Shields at 40%. They're closing fast." Hina crushed her cigarette in a nearby ashtray. Her expression was a mask of cold professionalism. But beneath it, a current of pragmatic fury churned. She had been outmaneuvered. Her men were dying because of faulty intelligence and some pirate's miraculous technological leap. She drew her hand back, ready to give the order to concentrate all fire on the lead ship, a suicidal gambit at best, when a sound pierced the din. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't the roar of a sea king. It was a high, ethereal whine, like the air itself was being torn in two. Every head on the bridge, and likely on every ship in the entire battle, turned towards the sky. A pinprick of gold appeared against the bruised, gray expanse of the calm belt's sky. It wasn't the sun. It was too fast, too sharp. It streaked downward, leaving a trail of shimmering, golden energy in its wake. A comet screaming towards the heart of the pirate armada. What is that? The ensign stammered, his earlier fear replaced by dumbfounded awe. Hina didn't answer. A knot in her stomach she hadn't even realized was there began to loosen. She had only seen that particular phenomenon twice before, and both times it had heralded an ending so absolute it was more akin to a line being drawn in history. The golden streak stopped. It hung in the air for a single, breathless second, directly over the center of Grieg's fleet. Then, it bloomed. From the single point of light, hundreds, no, 1,000. Identical figures erupted outwards in a silent, perfect sphere of orange and yellow. Each one was a mirror image. A man in a magnificent white coat with orange flames licking its hem, the kanji for sovereign, emblazoned on the back. In the right hand of each figure, a sphere of swirling, impossibly dense blue energy spun with a noise like a hurricane condensed into a ball. Sage art, a voice, young and vibrant and utterly calm, echoed not through the air, but directly in the minds of every living person for miles. Massive Rasengan barrage. What followed was not a battle. It was a harvest. The 1,000 figures descended. They moved with a synchronized, surgical precision that was terrifying to behold. One clone appeared above a pirate frigate. The Rasengan in its hand didn't just smash into the deck. It touched the main mast, and the compressed energy didn't explode. It ground. The thick, ironwood mast twisted, splintered, and disintegrated into nothing. The clone was gone an instant later, appearing at the ship's stern to apply the same treatment to its rudder. Another group of 10 clones descended on one of the larger cruisers. They moved in concert, striking the cannons, the capstan, the forecastle. The ship wasn't blown apart. It was methodically and completely disassembled, like a child's toy being neatly taken to pieces. Planks were sheared, sails were shredded, and the hull was cracked open just enough to let the still, dead water of the calm belt flood in. There were no screams of the dying, only the surprised shouts of pirates as they were pitched into the ocean. The clones moved with a grace that belied their destructive purpose, sometimes even taking a moment to flick a pirate out of the path of a falling piece of rigging. It was efficient, it was total, and it was utterly, maddeningly, non-lethal. From the bridge of the full bind, Hina and her crew watched in stunned silence. The cacophony of battle had been replaced by the rhythmic, grinding hum of 1,000 Rasengans. The pirate armada, which had been moments from claiming victory, was being systematically neutralized. Not destroyed, neutralized. The distinction was critical, and it was the calling card of one man. In less than 5 minutes, it was over. The 1,000 clones vanished in puffs of smoke, their duty done. The golden light that had hung in the sky was gone. Where 50 proud pirate ships had sailed, there was now only a sprawling flotilla of crippled, sinking hulks and thousands of pirates bobbing in the water, their weapons lost, their spirits broken. Even the Sea Kings seemed to have retreated, intimidated by the sheer scale of the energy that had been unleashed. The silence that returned was heavier than before. It was the silence of utter finality. Then, a flicker of movement. A single figure, the original, descended from the sky. He wasn't moving with the blistering speed of before. He was drifting, carried on the wind as gently as a leaf. He landed on the CK of the full bind with no more sound than a whisper of cloth. He stood there for a moment, the magnificent sovereign's coat settling around him. Underneath, he wore a simple orange jacket and black pants. He looked impossibly young, barely out of his 20s, with a sun-kissed, easy-going face, 3 strange whisker-like marks on each cheek, and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. His posture was relaxed, hands stuffed in his pockets, a complete contradiction to the apocalyptic power he had just displayed. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the hero of the 4th Great Ninja War, the transcendent human, and, by a decree from the 5 elders that had shaken the world government to its core, the first and only fleet sovereign of the Marines, a position created for him, placing him above even the fleet admiral. He was a walking, talking paradox, a weapon of mass destruction with the heart of a saint. Hina finally found her breath. She strode out onto the deck, her heels clicking with sharp authority on the metal. Her crew remained frozen, their eyes locked on the blonde man who had just saved them. "Fleet Sovereign," she said, her voice a model of military decorum. "You have my gratitude." Vice Admiral Hina, reporting. "The pirate armada, led by Gallows, Grieg, has been." "Are you okay, Hina-chan?" Naruto asked, cutting her off. He smiled, a genuine, blindingly bright grin that seemed to warm the chill air. He pulled one hand from his pocket. In it, he held a sealed, insulated ramen cup. Steam was still ghosting from the lid. "I kept it warm for you. Figured it'd be cold out here." "Believe it." Hina's brain, a finely tuned machine of strategy and pragmatic logic, stuttered to a halt. Her perfectly composed expression faltered. She stared at the ramen cup, then at his smiling face, then back at the cup. He had just single-handedly defeated a fleet that had crippled her own, a feat that would be sung about in taverns for a century, and his first action was to offer her instant noodles. Chan, she managed, the informal, almost childish honorific catching in her throat. Well, yeah, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. You looked like you were having a rough time. Nothing a good bowl of miso chashu can't fix. Besides, his eyes flickered out to the defeated pirates, his smile fading just a little, replaced by a flicker of professional seriousness. You handle the cages, I'll handle the big stuff. That's the deal, right? He was referring to their unofficial partnership. Hina, with her masterful ability to capture and contain individuals, often found herself working in concert with Naruto. The ultimate weapon against armies and inanimate objects. She handled the people, he handled the property. She felt a flush of heat creep up her neck, a mixture of embarrassment and something else she refused to name. He was treating this like a Tuesday. Your timing was adequate, she said, reverting to her cool, detached persona. Hina appreciates the assistance. Now, for the official report. Fleet Sovereign Uzumaki. The new voice was sharp, zealous, and ringing with indignation. Both Naruto and Hina turned. A marine cutter had pulled alongside the full bind. ND storming across the gangplank was a young woman in a standard captain's coat. She had dark, shoulder-length hair, and a pair of spectacles perched on her nose. Two famous swords, Shigur and the Mado Sandai Kitetsu, were strapped to her waist. Captain Tashigi came to a halt a few feet from them, her chest heaving. She had been on one of the reinforcement ships, close enough to witness the entire event. Her eyes, magnified by her glasses, were blazing with a righteous fire. Captain Tashigi, Hina said, her voice laced with a warning tone. Your tone is out of line. Tashigi ignored her vice admiral completely. Her focus was solely on Naruto. That was not justice, she declared, her voice trembling slightly with the force of her conviction. That was a demonstration, an exercise in overwhelming force. You didn't fight them, you eradicated them from the board. There was no honor, no challenge. You used a sledgehammer to kill a fly. Hina prepared to reprimand her, to have her confined for insubordination. One did not speak to the fleet sovereign that way. But Naruto held up a hand, his expression no longer smiling, but not angry either. It was curious, interested. He tilted his head, his blue eyes studying Tashigi. A sledgehammer, he repeated, thoughtfully. He looked back at the ruined fleet, the thousands of men now being rounded up by the recovering marine ships. He was quiet for a long moment. Hina could practically feel the tension radiating from Tashigi, who was braced for a dismissal or a punishment. Then, Naruto looked back at the captain and nodded slowly. You're right. Tashigi's righteous anger evaporated, replaced by pure shock. What? You're right, Naruto said again, his voice sincere. It was a sledgehammer. The problem is, sometimes you need a sledgehammer. Grieg's ships were about to destroy this one, he gestured to the full bind. Your vice admiral and her entire crew were about to be killed. My job is to protect people. All of them. The Marines under my care. And even the pirates, if I can help it. I chose the fastest way to end the fight and ensure zero casualties on either side. But, he took a step closer, his gaze softening. It doesn't mean your point is wrong. It felt like overkill because it was overkill. There's always a cleaner, better way. I just haven't found it for a problem this big yet. He looked her square in the eye, and for the first time. Tashigi saw past the living legend and the overwhelming power. She saw a man who was genuinely listening, who was considering her words with weight and seriousness. You care a lot about the how, don't you, Captain? He asked. About the spirit of the fight, not just the result. Tashigi, flustered, pushed her glasses up her nose. The process of justice is as important as the outcome. If we use the methods of monsters to enforce peace, then we become the monsters. Naruto's lips curved into a small, appreciative smile. I like that. Hold on to that fire, Captain. The world needs more people who care about the how. Don't ever lose it. He then turned back to Hina, his bright grin returning as if the serious conversation had never happened. Now, about that ramen. It's gonna get cold. Hina stared at him, then glanced at the utterly bewildered Captain Tashigi, whose face was now a fascinating shade of red. He had complimented her, validated her, N.D. then completely disarmed the entire confrontation. He hadn't pulled rank. He hadn't been offended. He had treated a captain's passionate, borderline insubordinate outburst is a valid philosophical debate. Hina will pass, she said, finally taking the offered ramen cup, its warmth a strange, solid comfort in her hands. Hina has prisoners to process. But her voice lacked its usual icy edge. This man, this force of nature, was going to be the death of her carefully constructed composure. The journey back to Marineford was a study in contrasts. Naruto, true to his word, had located Gallows Grieg amidst the bobbing pirates and personally deposited him in a sea prism stone cell aboard Hina's ship, chatting with him amicably the whole way about the best seasoning for fish, much to the pirates' terrified confusion. For the rest of the trip, the fleet sovereign divided his time. He spent hours with the engine room crews, using his clones to help repair the battered ships with uncanny speed and efficiency. Laughing and joking with the enlisted men, who quickly went from being terrified of him to treating him like a beloved, slightly eccentric older brother. He also sought out Tashigi. He found her on the training deck, going through her sword katas with a ferocity that spoke of a deeply troubled mind. He didn't interrupt, he just sat, cross-legged, and watched. When she finally finished, panting and sweat-soaked, he simply asked, "Tell me about your swords." What followed was a 2-hour conversation. Tashigi, hesitant at first, found herself swept up in his genuine interest. She spoke of her quest to liberate famous blades from the hands of evil men. He, in turn, told her stories from his own world, of swords that could channel lightning and of a legendary blade made of pure chakra. He never once made her feel small or naive. He listened, truly listened, and by the end, she found herself looking at the man who commanded 1,000 clones and saw, instead, a fellow warrior who respected the soul of a weapon. His interactions with Hina were different. They were brief, professional, and crackling with unspoken tension. He would find her on the bridge, studying charts or filing reports. He wouldn't offer ramen again, but he'd bring 2 cups of tea, setting one on her console without a word. They would stand in comfortable silence, watching the sea. In these quiet moments, she found his presence wasn't overwhelming. It was steadying, a calm anchor in the center of the hurricane that was his own power. He never pushed, never pried. He was just there, and she found, to her profound irritation, that she didn't mind. When they finally sailed through the gates of justice, the atmosphere shifted. The easy camaraderie of the fleet dissolved, replaced by the stiff, starched formality of Marine headquarters. As Naruto stepped onto the docks, the salutes were sharp, the faces were stoic, but the eyes of every Marine held a mixture of awe and fear. He was not one of them, not really. He was something other. His report to Fleet Admiral Sakazuki was, as always, an exercise in biting one's tongue. Sakazuki's office was oppressively hot, the air thick with the smell of sulfur and cigar smoke. A physical manifestation of the man's magma-based powers and personality. A successful operation, I'm told, Sakazuki grunted, not looking up from a document on his desk. His massive frame was draped in his signature red suit, a volcano barely contained by tailored cloth. The pirate fleet is neutralized. Grieg is in custody. All Marine personnel survived, Naruto said, his tone light but with an underlying firmness. He remained standing in the center of the room, a splash of vibrant orange and white in the oppressive crimson and black. Sakazuki finally looked up, his eyes hard and unforgiving. Your methods remain theatrical, Uzumaki. You leveled an entire fleet but left thousands of pirates alive for us to process, feed, and imprison. It's an inefficient application of your power. Absolute justice demands a permanent solution. Casualties are inefficient. Fleet Admiral, Naruto replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Dead men can't be interrogated. Dead men can't be rehabilitated. And my men don't have to carry the weight of being executioners. That seems pretty efficient to me. The title, Fleet Sovereign, had been a political necessity. After Naruto's arrival in this world 2 decades prior, his power had grown to a point that it could no longer be ignored. He had ended wars, saved islands, and defeated threats that had stymied the full force of the Navy. All with his strange, unwavering moral code. The world government couldn't control him, so they promoted him. It was a gilded cage, a title meant to bind him to their structure. It hadn't worked. He was loyal to the people, not the institution. And men like Sakazuki, men who believed in the institution above all else, could not abide it. See that your official report is filed, Sakazuki growled, his gaze dropping back to his desk in a clear dismissal. And try to keep the collateral paperwork to a minimum next time. Naruto gave a mock salute. Will do, Akainu-san. He used the man's old moniker deliberately, a small act of defiance, before turning and striding out of the suffocating heat of the office. His next meeting was even less pleasant. It was via a specially encrypted Den Mushi in a secure, isolated chamber. The faces of the 5 elders appeared, not as people, but as imposing, black silhouettes against a stark white background. Fleet Sovereign Uzumaki, the bald, sword-wielding elder spoke, his voice dry as ancient parchment. We commend you on your swift resolution of the Calm Belt crisis. You continue to be a valuable asset to the stability of the world. The words were praise, but Naruto's sensory abilities, honed by a lifetime of discerning malice, felt nothing but cold, calculating appraisal. They weren't congratulating a colleague. They were evaluating a weapon's performance. Just doing my job, Naruto said, keeping his tone breezy. Though you might want to look into who's selling advanced C-Prism stone tech to pirates. That seems like a bigger threat to stability than a few dozen tugboats. All matters are under control, the tall, blonde elder stated, his voice smooth and dismissive. Your focus should remain on large-scale threats. Leave the intricacies of politics to us. That is all. The connection cut, leaving Naruto alone in the silent, sterile room. He let out a long sigh, the cheerful mask dropping for a moment. He could feel their lies. Their obfuscation, like a slime coating their words. They didn't see him as a person. They never had. Miles away, in the heart of the world, in the Pangaea castle of Mary Geoise. The 5 silhouettes turned from the blank Den Mushi. The room was opulent, a stark contrast to their shadowy appearance. He grows more defiant, the elder with the large mustache noted, his voice laced with displeasure. His morality is a liability, the sword wielder agreed. His refusal to kill, his fraternization with the lower ranks, his public displays of power that undermine the very structure of the Marines, he was a gamble, and he has proven to be an uncontrollable one. The tall, blonde elder walked to a window overlooking the pristine, manicured lawns of the Holy Land. He is a blunt instrument in a world that requires a scalpel. His power is absolute, but his will is his own. That was our mistake. The experiment has failed, another rasped. He is a king who refuses to wear his crown. Such a being is more dangerous than any Yonko. A 5th figure, one who had remained silent, stepped forward. His voice was the oldest, the coldest. Then the contingency must be accelerated. The stability he provides is no longer worth the chaos his ideology inspires. It is time to prepare a more obedient form of order. He paused, his silhouette turning towards a hidden passage. Inform the keepers. Begin the final preparations. Awaken the arbiter from the sanctuary. Back in his personal quarters atop the tallest spire of Marineford, Naruto stood on a balcony, the sea breeze a welcome relief. His office was simple, functional, with a small kitchenette dedicated almost entirely to ramen production. Below, the fortress city bustled with activity, a monument to order and strength. He closed his eyes, extending his senses, a technique far beyond the observation hockey of this world. He could feel the life force of every person on the island, a vibrant tapestry of energy. He could feel the pulse of the ocean, the slow, ancient life of the planet itself. It was a symphony he had long ago learned to love, a constant reassurance of connection, of life. But tonight, for the first time, he felt something else. It was a flicker, on the very edge of his phenomenal sensory range. A disturbance from the direction of the red line. It wasn't a presence. It was a pocket of nothing. A hole in the symphony. It was like looking at a star-filled sky and seeing a patch of absolute, light-devouring blackness. It was a note of pure, utter silence in the grand song of the world. A void that his senses recoiled from. It was cold, it was wrong, and it was ancient. A shiver, an actual, physical shiver, traced its way down his spine. It was a feeling he hadn't felt since he faced Kagaya. The feeling of something fundamentally alien to the natural order of things. The feeling vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving him with nothing but a profound sense of unease. He stared out at the dark ocean. His blue eyes narrowed. The 5 elders' cold dismissal, Sakazuki's simmering resentment, and now this silent, creeping emptiness. The sledgehammer had dealt with the pirates. But he had a sinking feeling that a much older, much darker storm was gathering, and a sledgehammer wouldn't be nearly enough. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Whispers in the Sand. The silence from Mary Geoise was louder than any declaration of war. In the days following the Calm Belt incident, Naruto had filed his official report, along with a pointed addendum regarding the pirate fleet's advanced sea prism stone technology. He had expected a flurry of activity, a special investigation, perhaps even a direct summons. He received nothing. His inquiries were met with polite, bureaucratic stone walls. The issue, he was told, was being handled at the highest level. It was the political equivalent of being patted on the head and told to run along. He was in his Spartan office, staring at a map of the four blues and the Grand Line, a half-eaten cup of instant ramen steaming forgotten on his desk. His sovereign's coat was slung over the back of his chair. He felt a familiar restlessness, the kind that always set in when he was forced to be still while he knew something was wrong. The world was a complex, interlocking machine, and he could feel a gear grinding deep within its works, threatening to shatter the whole thing. A sharp knock at his door broke his concentration. "Enter," he called out, his voice betraying a hint of his frustration. The door slid open to reveal Vice Admiral Hina. She was, as always, immaculate, her fuchsia suit a slash of color against the drab hallway. She held a thin manila folder in her hands, her expression unreadable. "Fleet Sovereign," she began, her tone formal. "Naruto is fine, Hina. You know that," he said, waving a hand dismissively. He turned from the map, his blue eyes locking onto hers. He could sense her tension. It was a tightly coiled spring of professional anxiety. "What's wrong?" She walked to his desk, placing the folder on its surface. She didn't open it. Hina's intelligence network has been monitoring Baroque Works for months. Standard procedure. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Baroque Works, a shadowy organization of bounty hunters and assassins operating in the Grand Line. He'd heard whispers, but the world government had shown little interest. "They've grown bolder," Hina continued, her voice dropping. "More organized. Chatter speaks of a grand-scale operation. Code name: Utopia. The target is the Kingdom of Alabasta. We believe their goal is to incite a civil war and seize control of the country." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. The leader is believed to be one of the 7 warlords of the sea. Naruto's posture straightened. A warlord, one of the government-sanctioned pirates meant to keep the peace, was orchestrating the destruction of a member nation. It was a blatant, unforgivable betrayal. "Crocodile." Hina nodded, a flicker of something, perhaps grim satisfaction at his quick uptake, in her eyes. "The hero of the desert. He's been playing the part of the nation's savvy, or while secretly orchestrating the rebellion against its king. It's a brilliant, insidious strategy." "Then we move," Naruto said, his voice hard. "Mobilize a fleet. We'll land at Alubarna, secure the royal family, and cut the head off the snake." "We can't," Hina stated flatly. "I brought this intelligence to the fleet admiral an hour ago. He brought it to the 5 elders." She finally slid the folder towards him. "This is the official response." Naruto picked it up. It wasn't a folder. It was a single, stiff sheet of parchment bearing the highest seal of the world government. The message was brief and utterly unambiguous. "Fleet Sovereign Uzumaki is ordered to stand down. Warlord Sir Crocodile is a valued asset of the world government. The situation in Alabasta is a minor internal affair. Do not interfere." Naruto read the words twice, the cheerful energy draining from his face, replaced by a cold, quiet anger that was far more unnerving than any explosive outburst. He placed the parchment back on the desk, his touch so gentle it seemed to defy the fury coiling in his gut. "They know," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "They know he's a traitor, and they're letting it happen." "Alabasta has a poneglyph," Hina said, connecting the final dot for him. "The elders value Crocodile's tenuous loyalty, or perhaps his ability to keep others away from that ancient text, more than the why value the lives of a few million citizens of a desert kingdom. From their perspective, it is a pragmatic choice." "It's monstrous," Naruto corrected her. He stood up, the restlessness gone, replaced by a crystalline sense of purpose. He walked to his chair and shrugged on his sovereign's coat. The flames on the hem seemed to flicker with a life of their own. "What are you doing?" Hina asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'm going to Alabasta," he said, not looking at her. "The world government gave me an order. But my duty is to the people. And the people of Alabasta are about to be sacrificed for political convenience. I won't let that happen." He finally turned to face her, his blue eyes blazing with conviction. "This is an off-the-books operation. No ships, no battalions. It's treason. It will mean the end of your career, and probably mine too. But I'm asking anyway." He didn't need to finish the question. Hina stared at him, her mind racing. This was it, the moment she knew would come. The moment his unshakable, naive idealism would crash headlong into the immovable wall of political reality. To go with him was madness. It was career suicide. It was a betrayal of the very structure she had dedicated her life to upholding. But to let him go alone. He was a god of destruction, but he thought with his heart. He'd charge into Rainbase, announce his presence, and bring the whole rotten casino down on his head. He needed a strategist. He needed someone to watch his back, to think 3 steps ahead while he was busy making friends with his enemies. "Hina is a vice admiral of the Marines," she said, her voice tight. "My duty is to follow orders." Naruto's gaze didn't waver. It was full of understanding, not judgment. "I know." She held his gaze for a long second, then let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of her entire career. "But, Hina is also very curious to see what kind of report you would file for a mission that doesn't officially exist." She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the desk. "You'll need more than brute force. This is an intelligence game. You'll need someone who knows Baroque works, officer class. Many of them are notorious swordsmen." A slow smile spread across Naruto's face. "I've got just the person in mind." Captain Tashigi was nearly decapitated by a training dummy's swinging blade. She ducked just in time, the whistle of steel tickling the hairs on the back of her neck. She was distracted. Ever since the mission in the calm belt, her mind was a whirlwind. The fleet sovereign, Naruto Uzumaki, hadn't dismissed her. He had listened. He had agreed with her. And then he had spent 2 hours talking to her about the soul of a sword. It was baffling. It was exhilarating. And it had completely shattered her image of him as a distant, godlike weapon. "You're going to get yourself killed if you keep that up." Tashigi yelped and spun around, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of Shiger. Naruto was standing there, leaning against the doorway of the training hall, a cheerful grin on his face. Vice Admiral Hina stood beside him, her arms crossed, looking distinctly unimpressed with the state of the training hall. "Fleet Sovereign, Vice Admiral," Tashigi stammered, snapping to attention. "At ease, Captain," Naruto said, walking into the room. "I need to borrow your expertise. And your swords." He laid out the situation with blunt, startling honesty. Crocodile's betrayal, the suffering of Alabasta, the world government's order to stand down, and his intention to defy that order. Unlike Hina, Tashigi had no internal debate. The moment she heard that a warlord was preying on a nation and that the government intended to let it happen, a white-hot flame of pure, unadulterated justice ignited in her chest. Career suicide, treason, those were just words. The reality was a kingdom in peril. "When do we leave?" she asked, her voice ringing with a conviction that made Hina raise a single, skeptical eyebrow. "Now," Naruto said, "pack light. We're going undercover." Their transport was unconventional. One of Naruto's personal summons, a colossal, wise old toad named Gamakichi who, with a single, chakra-fueled leap, could cross half the Grand Line in an afternoon. They landed under the cover of a dune-swept dusk, miles from the nearest Alabastan port. The air was dry and baked, even as the sun bled out across the horizon. "Right," Naruto said, clapping his hands together. "Time for disguises. Believe it." He bit his thumb and wove a series of hand signs too fast for Tashigi to follow. Transformation jutsu. In a puff of smoke, his bright orange jacket and sovereign's coat were gone. In his place stood a lanky, slightly goofy-looking merchant, dressed in loose-fitting desert robes, with a wide, toothy grin and a perpetually optimistic glint in his eye. He then turned to the 2 women. Before Hina could protest, she was enveloped in smoke. When it cleared, her sharp fuchsia suit was replaced by the severe practical black robes of a sellsword bodyguard. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her expression, if possible, was even more stern. Tashigi was next. The smoke cleared to reveal she was dressed as a young, eager scholar, with a leather satchel full of scrolls and a pair of rounder, more academic-looking spectacles perched on her nose. Her swords were still at her waist, they looked more like historical artifacts she was transporting than weapons she knew how to use. "This is ridiculous," Hina stated, tugging at the unfamiliar fabric of her sleeve. "Hina looks like a common thug. You look intimidating." "It's perfect," Naruto boomed, slapping her on the back. Hina didn't budge, but a muscle in her jaw twitched. "And Tashigi-chan, you look super smart. No one will suspect a thing. We're just a humble merchant, his trusty bodyguard, and the brilliant historian he hired to appraise some old ruins. Let's go." Their journey to Rainbase, Crocodile's base of operations, was a blur of sand and sun. They traveled by rented eyelash camel, the goofy merchant, Naru, keeping up a constant stream of cheerful, idiotic chatter that set Hina's teeth on edge but seemed put every traveler and merchant they passed at ease. Tashigi, meanwhile, found herself playing her part with surprising ease, asking locals about the history of the land, her genuine curiosity a perfect cover. In the process, she heard the stories, the heartbreaking tales of a land without rain, of a king blamed for a tragedy he didn't create, and of the growing, desperate anger of the rebel army. With every story, the fire in her belly burned hotter. Rainbase was an oasis of sin in a dying land. A city built around a colossal casino, the Rain Dinners, where the desperate and the wealthy came to gamble away their fortunes under the watchful eye of its owner, Sir Crocodile. They secured a room in a dusty inn, which quickly became their base of operations. Hina, in her element, transformed it into a command center. Her personal Den Mushi network feeding her a constant stream of low-level intelligence. "Baroque works. Officer agents are all here," she explained that first night, pointing to locations on a hastily drawn map of the city. "Mr. 1, Miss Doublefinger, Mr. 2 Bon Clay, they're the key players. Tashigi, your knowledge of their fighting styles will be invaluable. Many of them are swordsmen you've tracked." Quote, "Mr. 1, Daz Bones," Tashigi murmured, her expression grim. "He's not a swordsman. He is a sword. He ate the dice fruit. They say no swordsman has ever been able to cut him. We're not here to fight them head-on," Hina reminded her, her sharp gaze flicking to Naruto. "We're here for proof. Proof of Crocodile's plan, something so undeniable that your friend, Morgans can plaster it on the front page of every newspaper in the world." Naruto gave her a thumbs up. "Got it. Stealth mode. I'm great at stealth. Super stealthy." Hina just sighed and lit a cigarette. The next few days were a tense dance of espionage. Hina coordinated from the inn, a spider in the center of her web. Tashigi, as the scholar, walked the city, her ears open, her eyes sharp, gathering whispers about the movements of Baroque works, agents. Naruto, as the merchant, gambled in the lower floors of the Rain Dinners, losing just enough to be unnoticeable, all while his enhanced senses mapped the entire building, feeling the flow of people, the locations of the guards, the faint, cold presence of Crocodile in his penthouse suite. One evening, Tashigi was on the balcony of their room, meticulously cleaning the Sandai Kitetsu. The moonlight glinted off its wicked, cursed steel. "That's the one, isn't it?" Naruto's voice came from the doorway. He walked out to join her, leaning on the railing. "The cursed one." Tashigi nodded, not looking up from her work. "It's a Mato, one of the finest blades ever forged. But it brings ruin to its wielders. They say anyone who draws it without a strong enough will meets a grisly end." "I used to have a sword like that," Naruto said quietly. Tashigi looked up, surprised. "You did? From your world?" He nodded, his gaze distant. "Not a sword, exactly. More like a monster. A giant fox made of pure hatred and chakra, sealed inside me when I was a baby. For a long time, everyone looked at me and saw the monster. They thought I was cursed. That I'd bring ruin to everyone." He looked at the Sandai Kitetsu, then back at her, a profound understanding in his eyes. "They were wrong. The power wasn't good or evil. The fox wasn't good or evil. It was just power. It was my will, my heart, that decided how it was used. I had to be stronger than the hate. I had to be stronger than the curse. He reached out, not to touch the sword, but just hovering his hand over it. He could feel the malevolent energy coming off it, a faint echo of the oppressive hate he had known for so long from Kurama. A sword is just steel, he said, his voice soft but firm. Its power comes from the will of the person holding it. That blade isn't your master, Tashigi-chan. You are its. Never forget that. Tashigi stared at him, speechless. He wasn't just talking about swords. He was talking about her, about himself, about the very nature of strength. He saw the curse not as a flaw to be overcome, but as a challenge to be mastered. In that moment, her admiration for him deepened into something more solid, more personal. He understood. Their cat-and-mouse game almost came to an abrupt end the following night. Acting on a tip, Tashigi and Naruto were investigating a warehouse near the casino rumored to be a storage depot for dance powder, the illegal rain-stealing substance Crocodile was using to frame the king. As they were examining a crate, the doors burst open. Standing there, silhouetted against the streetlights, was a mountain of a man with a gleaming, bald head and a one tattooed on his chest. Daz Bones. Mr. 1. Looks like we've got some rats, he said. His voice a low growl. Blades extended from his arms. The boss doesn't like rats. Before he could take a step, Naruto grabbed Tashigi's arm. No time to fight. Go. They bolted, bursting through a back wall in a shower of splintered wood. An alarm blared to life. Shouts echoed through the alleys. They were made. Split up. Hina's voice snapped in the tiny, hidden Den Mushi in Naruto's ear. Rendezvous at the south gate. They ran, footsteps pounding on the cobblestones. But Baroque Works agents were everywhere. They were being herded, funneled into a dead-end alley. Mr. 1 was behind them. Gaining, his footsteps heavy and implacable. In front of them, a wall. To their left, another. To their right, Hina suddenly appeared, skidding to a halt from an adjacent street. She'd been trying to create a diversion and had been cut off herself. They were trapped, the three of them, cornered in a narrow, trash-strewn alley. Footsteps were closing in from all sides. Hina is trapped, Hina hissed, her usual cool demeanor cracking under the pressure. No, you're not, Naruto said, his voice suddenly calm. He grabbed Hina with one arm, Tashigi with the other, pulling them tight against him. Hold on, and don't move. Don't even breathe. He slammed his hand against the brick wall. Transformation jutsu. There was a disorienting puff of smoke, and the world seemed to warp for a split second. Hina found herself pressed hard against Naruto's back, his warmth a solid, shocking presence. Tashigi was crushed against his chest, her face buried in the rough fabric of his robes. His heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against her ear. The three of them were fused together, an unwilling, breathless trinity. A second later, Mr. 1 and a half-dozen Baroque Works agents stormed into the alley. They stopped, looking around in confusion. Where'd they go? It's a dead end. One of them shouted. They're not here. Daz Bones growled, his eyes scanning the alley. He kicked a pile of old, dusty crates stacked against the wall, sending them tumbling. They must have found a way up. Spread out. Find them. The agents ran off, leaving the alley empty once more. For a long, silent moment, the pile of dusty crates remained perfectly still. Then, with another puff of smoke, it dissolved back into Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi. They stumbled apart, gasping for air. Tashigi's face was beet red, and she couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Hina, for the first time since Naruto had known her, looked genuinely flustered. She was straightening her robes, avoiding his gaze, a faint pink on her cheeks. That was an effective technique, she said, her voice strained. Told you I was stealthy, Naruto said with a grin, though even he felt the lingering charge of their close proximity. The adrenaline, the shared danger, the sheer physical intimacy of the moment had created a spark that now hung in the air between them. We're out of time, Hina said, quickly regaining her composure and pointing towards the towering casino. They're on high alert now. We have to move on Crocodile tonight. It's now or never. The Rain Dinner's casino was a fortress. But to a man who could sense life energy, it was a roadmap. Naruto led them through service tunnels and secret passages he had mapped in his mind, bypassing guards and security systems with contemptuous ease. They moved like ghosts, Hina's tactical direction guiding them, Tashigi's knowledge of the layout from her research proving invaluable. They reached the penthouse floor. A single, ornate door stood between them and their target. Two massive, muscle-bound guards stood before it, armed with bazookas. Hina combined them, Hina whispered. I can distract them, Tashigi offered, her hand on her sword. No need, Naruto said. He stepped forward. Before the guards could even register his presence, he chopped each of them once on the back of the neck. They slumped to the floor, unconscious. They'll wake up in an hour with a mild headache. He didn't kick the door in. He simply placed his hand on it and phased through it, appearing inside Crocodile's opulent office. Hina and Tashigi followed a second later, their eyes wide. The room was vast. A huge desk dominated one side, and behind it, in a large, throne-like chair, sat Sir Crocodile. He was a tall man with a predatory stillness, a massive golden hook where his left hand should be. A thick cigar clamped in his teeth. He didn't look surprised. He looked bored. Below his office, through a glass floor, they could see the pool filled with giant, ravenous banana-gators. Fleet Sovereign Naruto Uzumaki, Crocodile said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I confess, I didn't expect the world government's pet monster to come sniffing around my backyard. And to bring Vice Admiral Black Cage and a little sword-collecting girl with him. To what do I owe the displeasure? It's over, Crocodile, Naruto said, his voice level. We know about Operation Utopia. We know about the dance powder. We know everything. Crocodile chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Knowing and proving are two different things. You have no authority here. In fact, by being here, you are the one breaking the law. He rose from his chair, a small vortex of sand beginning to swirl around his feet. I am a warlord. You are a trespassing dog of the military. I am well within my rights to kill you where you stand. Go, both of you, Naruto said without turning. Get the proof. The ledgers, the maps, anything on his desk. I'll keep him busy. Naruto, his Logia, Tashigi began. I know, he said. His eyes fixed on Crocodile. He rolled his shoulders, and a faint, natural energy began to coalesce around him. Pigmentation appeared around his eyes. He had entered Sage mode. I've dealt with worse than a man made of sand. Crocodile lunged, his body transforming into a tidal wave of sand that surged across the room. Hina and Tashigi scrambled towards the desk as Naruto met the wave head-on. The fight was a battle of opposing philosophies. Crocodile was arrogance and entropy, his sandstorm seeking to erode and destroy. Naruto was life and control. He didn't try to punch the sand. He moved through it, his sage-enhanced senses allowing him to predict every single grain's movement. He was a fish swimming in Crocodile's current, untouchable. You can't touch me, you fool. Crocodile roared, reforming his body behind Naruto, his golden hook slashing for Naruto's head. Naruto ducked under the swing, his hand shooting out. It was coated in a thin, shimmering film of water he had drawn from the very air in the humid casino. He didn't need an ocean. He just needed a drop. His fingers brushed Crocodile's shoulder. For a split second, Crocodile's sandy form solidified. It was all Naruto needed. He didn't form a massive Rasengan. He didn't summon a clone. He formed a Rasengan in his palm no bigger than a gumball, a sphere of perfectly compressed, perfectly controlled rotational energy. He pressed it against Crocodile's chest. It's not about size, Naruto said, his voice calm amidst the swirling sand. It's about control. The tiny sphere whined, and the effect was horrific. Crocodile's eyes went wide with shock and agony. The Rasengan didn't explode. It ground into him, a miniature drill of pure force that bypassed his sandy defenses and ravaged him from the inside. He was thrown backward, not by an explosion, but by the sheer, focused kinetic energy, his body skipping across his own opulent office like a stone on water before crashing into the far wall. He slumped to the ground. Defeated. Got it, Tashigi called out, holding up a thick, leather-bound ledger. Hina had a rolled-up map in her hand. Naruto powered down from Sage mode, the eye markings vanishing. He walked over to the groaning warlord, and then did something none of them expected. He reached down and ripped the golden hook from Crocodile's arm, revealing the small, hidden poison needle underneath. He crushed it under his boot. No more tricks, Naruto said simply. He didn't look at his defeated foe again. He walked over to the grand window overlooking Rainbase. He pulled out a small, unassuming black Den Mushi. Who are you calling? Hina asked, securing the map. A friend, Naruto said. He dialed the number. A chirpy, distinctive voice answered. Morgans. Big news. You're on with the world's greatest journalist. Morgan-san, Naruto said, a grin spreading across his face. Have I got a story for you? Far away, in the sacred halls of Pangaea Castle, the 5 elders watched the news reports with expressions of cold fury. The front page of the World Economic Journal was a global bombshell. A picture of a defeated crocodile, the ledger of his crimes, the map of Operation Utopia. And the headline, in bold, world-shaking letters, Warlord Crocodile's treachery exposed. Fleet Sovereign Naruto Uzumaki saves Alabasta in defiance of government orders. Naruto hadn't just defeated a warlord. He had publicly humiliated the world government. He had exposed the rot in their warlord system for all to see. He had used their own political tool against them and broadcast their failure to the entire world. The insolence. The elder with the mustache snarled, slamming his fist on the table. He has made a mockery of this institution, the blonde elder said, his voice dangerously quiet. He is no longer an asset. He is a rogue element, an ideology that spreads like a disease. The bald, sword-wielding elder stood, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. The contingency is no longer a contingency. It is the solution. He has forced our hand. He turned to a shadowed alcove, where a lesser official waited, trembling. The time has come, the elder commanded, his voice echoing with 800 years of authority. Give the order. Begin the Arbiter's Awakening sequence. Now. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Cage, the Sword, and the Sun. The fallout was immediate and absolute. The world was in an uproar, but inside the pristine, white walls of Marineford, a different kind of storm was brewing. Naruto wasn't celebrated as a hero. He was treated like a pariah. The air crackled with a silent, formal condemnation that was more suffocating than any shouted reprimand. He was summoned not to the Fleet Admiral's office, but to the Grand Assembly Hall, a cavern. Ouse chamber usually reserved for the commendation of entire fleets. This time, it was empty, save for the 5 monolithic chairs on the raised dais. He wasn't meeting with the Fleet Admiral. He was being judged by the 5 elders themselves, their images projected onto the chairs via colossal Den Mushi, their silhouetted forms looming over him like specters of judgment. Naruto stood alone in the center of the hall, his sovereign's coat a defiant slash of orange and white against the sterile marble. He wasn't in chains, but he might as well have been. The pressure in the room was immense, a palpable weight of centuries-old authority pressing down on him. Naruto Uzumaki, the voice of the tall, blonde elder boomed, devoid of its usual silky veneer. It was as hard and cold as frozen steel. You have directly defied a clear and explicit order from the highest authority in this world. I upheld my duty, Naruto replied, his voice calm and clear, echoing in the vast emptiness. My duty is to the people. Crocodile was threatening to destroy an entire nation. The people of Alabasta are now safe. Your duty, as you define it, is irrelevant. The mustached elder snarled. Your duty is to the world government that granted you your title. You have destabilized the balance of the 3 great powers. You have publicly shamed this institution and sown doubt in the minds of the populace. You have acted like a common vigilante. Quote, Naruto's expression didn't change. If protecting millions of innocent lives makes me a vigilante, then I'll wear that title proudly. The warlord system is flawed. I just proved it. Maybe instead of punishing the man who pointed out the rot, you should focus on cutting it out. The silence that followed was glacial. Naruto could feel their fury, a wave of cold, controlled rage washing over him. They weren't angry that he was wrong. They were angry that he was right, and that he had dared to say it out loud for the whole world to hear. Your power has made you arrogant, the bald, sword-wielding elder stated, his voice a razor's edge. Effective immediately, you are formally censured. You are stripped of all command authority. You will be confined to your quarters at Marineford until such a time as we decide your fate. You are not to leave this island. You are not to communicate with outside parties. Is that understood, Uzumaki? The deliberate dropping of his title was the final, cutting remark. He was no longer the fleet sovereign. He was just a problem to be contained. Loud and clear, Naruto said, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. He gave a slight bow that was more mockery than respect, turned his back on the looming silhouettes, and walked out of the hall, the sound of his footsteps the only defiance he had left. The censure extended to his company conspirators. Vice Admiral Hina and Captain Tashigi were officially benched, relieved of all duties and confined to their quarters, pending a full investigation into their gross insubordination. It was a prison of boredom and bureaucracy, a paper cage meant to isolate and break them. But it had an unintended side effect. For the first time, the three of them were trapped in the same place, with nothing to do but confront the consequences of their actions, and the tangled, unspoken thing that had sparked to life between them in that breathless alleyway in Rainbase. 2 days into their confinement, the tension was a physical presence in the air. Naruto spent his time meditating on his balcony, trying to find the strange, cold, nothingness he had sensed before, but it was gone, leaving only a lingering unease. He felt like a caged tiger, his power and energy useless against walls of political maneuvering. Hina chain smoked in her Spartan quarters, filing Pointel's paperwork and rereading the same intelligence reports until the words blurred. She was a creature of action and strategy, and this forced inertia was a unique form of torture. She was angry at the elders for their hypocrisy, at Sakazuki for his smug satisfaction, but most of all, she was angry at Naruto. Angry at him for being right. Angry at him for being so recklessly, brilliantly, frustratingly himself. And angry at herself for following him. Tashigi polished her swords. She polished them until the steel was so bright it hurt to look at. Shigur, the Sandai Kidetsu, even her standard issue marine blade. She went through her katas until her muscles screamed in protest. Her mind, however, was a storm. She had done the right thing. She knew it in her bones. She had stood for justice against corruption. And she would do it again in a heartbeat. But she had also betrayed the very institution she had sworn to uphold. And she had done it for him. For the man who spoke of a sword's soul, and who wielded a power greater than any king, but who looked at her with such simple, disarming respect. The inevitable confrontation happened on the third day. Hina, unable to bear the confines of her room any longer, went for a walk. The path she chose, perhaps unconsciously, led her to the training grounds. There, under the harsh midday sun, was Tashigi, moving through her sword forms with a desperate, frantic energy. Hina stopped at the edge of the training yard, lighting a cigarette. She watched for a few moments, her sharp eyes missing nothing, the slight hesitation in Tashigi's footwork, the tremor of exhaustion in her arms. The raw, conflicted emotion on her face. "You'll exhaust yourself, Captain," Hina said, her voice cutting through the air. Tashigi froze mid-swing, her chest heaving. She turned, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her glove. "Vice Admiral, there's no one here to impress," Hina continued, taking a slow drag from her cigarette. "Your righteous fury won't cut through the elders' decree." Tashigi's back straightened, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a defensive spark. "I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm trying to understand." "Understand what?" Hina asked, her tone laced with a weary cynicism. "That we threw our careers away for an idealist. That we followed a man who thinks he can fix the world with a smile and a Rasengan. Hina has understood that for quite some time. Hina is just disappointed it took this long for the consequences to catch up. He's not just an idealist." Tashigi shot back, her voice rising. "He's the only one in the entire world government who still remembers what the word, justice, is supposed to mean. You see his idealism as a liability. I see it as the only thing that makes this uniform worth wearing. His idealism is a luxury paid for by his monstrous power." Hina countered, stepping into the training yard. The smoke from her cigarette curled around her like a shroud. "He can afford to be noble because he can level an island before breakfast. We can't. His path will get him killed, or worse, turned into the very monster he fights. And he'll drag everyone who believes in him down with him. So we should just follow orders," Tashigi demanded, her hand tightening on her sword's hilt. "We should have let Alabasta burn. Is that what a good marine does?" Is that your pragmatic justice? My pragmatic justice keeps my people alive. Hina's voice was sharp, a weapon in itself. It understands that some battles cannot be won. You look at him and see a savior. Hina looks at him and sees a beautiful, magnificent time bomb. And we are standing right next to him. It was then that they both realized they weren't arguing about Naruto. Not really. They were arguing about themselves. Tashigi saw in Naruto the validation of her purest beliefs. Hina saw in him a reflection of the hope she thought she had lost long ago, a hope she was terrified to embrace because she knew how much it would hurt when it was inevitably crushed. They weren't rivals competing for a man's affection. They were two soldiers on opposite sides of the same trench, both desperately, fiercely, wanting to protect the same burning light. Maybe the problem isn't him. The voice came from behind them, quiet but resonant. They both turned. Naruto was standing there, his hands in his pockets, his usual grin absent. His expression was open, vulnerable, and achingly serious. He had heard everything. He walked towards them, stopping between the two women. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and raw emotion. He didn't let it fester. He faced it head on. "Hina," he said, his blue eyes meeting her guarded gaze. "You're right. I am a liability. I don't think like a soldier. I don't see the traps or the political fallout until I've already walked into them. I need you. I need your eyes, your mind. I need you to see the dangers I'm too stubborn or too stupid to see for myself. Your pragmatism, it's not cynicism. It's a shield. And I need it." He then turned to Tashigi, his expression softening. "And you, Tashigi, you're right, too. You remind me why I fight. When I'm getting lost in the politics and the fighting. You're the compass that points back to what's right. Not what's easy, not what's ordered, but what's right. Your fire, it's not naive. It's the whole point. It's the fuel." He looked back and forth between them. A small, sad smile on his face. "You think you're fighting over me. But you're not. You're two halves of the same idea. Justice needs a heart, and it needs a mind. It needs passion, and it needs pragmatism. It needs a sword, and it needs a cage." He took a deep breath, the sound loud in the sudden silence. I don't know how to explain this. In my old world, my heart was always big. Too big, maybe. I learned that love isn't a finite thing. It doesn't get divided. It just grows. And when I'm with you," he looked at Hina, "I feel grounded. I feel seen for the weapon I am. And you're not afraid of it. You just want to aim it correctly." He turned to Tashigi. "And when I'm with you, I feel understood. You see the person, not the power. You see the why." His voice was quiet, stripped of all bravado. It was a raw, honest confession. "I feel a connection to you both. A deep one. It's not a choice between you. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking, can we find a way to stand together? The three of us. Because I think we're stronger that way. I think I'm better that way." It wasn't a confident declaration from a king. It was a vulnerable plea from a man. He laid his heart bare on the sun-baked dirt of the training yard, leaving the choice, the power, entirely in their hands. Hina stared at him, her cigarette forgotten, burning down between her fingers. Her meticulously constructed walls of cynicism and professionalism were being dismantled, not by a tidal wave of power, but by the simple, devastating force of his sincerity. Tashigi's righteous anger had melted away, replaced by a profound, heart-stopping realization. He wasn't asking them to share him. He was asking them to join him, to complete him. Before either of them could find the words to respond, a commotion from the direction of the main plaza shattered the fragile moment. Shouts, a woman's scream, and the unmistakable, nasal whine of a voice accustomed to getting whatever it wanted. "What is that?" Tashigi asked, startled. Naruto's head snapped up, his senses flaring. The emotional tenor of the plaza had shifted from orderly bustle to a nod of fear and disgust. "Trouble," he said, his voice instantly losing its vulnerability, replaced by a cold, hard edge. "Stay here." He vanished in a flicker of yellow, too fast to track. St. Charlo's, his ridiculous fishbowl helmet askew, a glob of half-chewed pastry clinging to his chin, pointed a fat, trembling finger at a young marine nurse. She had accidentally bumped into him, spilling a glass of water on his immaculate white robes. "Insolence!" he shrieked, his voice piercing the horrified silence of the plaza. This female dared to soil me. I will take her as my wife. No, a slave. She will be my slave wife. The nurse, a girl no older than 20, was pale with terror, tears streaming down her face. The Marines around them, veterans who had faced down pirates and sea kings, were frozen. Their faces were masks of impotent rage and self-loathing. They knew the law. To strike a celestial dragon, a world noble, was to invite the wrath of an admiral and a buster call. Their hands clenched into fists, their jaws tightened, but they did not move. They were bound by a law that defied all morality. Charlos's 2 bodyguards, enormous men in black suits, moved to grab the weeping nurse. I wouldn't do that. The voice was calm, conversational. But it cut through the plaza like a shard of ice. Saint Charlos and his bodyguards turned. Naruto Uzumaki stood 10 feet away, his hands in his pockets, his sovereign's coat fluttering in the breeze. He looked utterly relaxed, as if he were commenting on the weather. And who are you to give me orders? Charlos screeched, his face turning a blotchy purple. Do you know who my father is? I am a god. I am a descendant of the founders of this world. I know who you are, Naruto said, his voice still deceptively mild. He took a slow step forward. You're a spoiled brat in a bubble, throwing a tantrum because you spilled your juice. The surrounding Marines gasped. It was a death sentence. To speak to a celestial dragon with such contempt was unthinkable. Kill him, Charlos shrieked, pointing at Naruto. Kill him now. That's an order. The bodyguards hesitated. They knew who Naruto was. They had heard the stories. But an order was an order. They raised their rifles. They never got the chance to fire. Naruto wasn't there anymore. He was standing directly in front of Saint Charlos, his blue eyes holding the celestial dragon's gaze. He hadn't moved fast. It was more like the world had rearranged itself to place him there. He didn't raise his fist. He didn't power up. He simply looked at Charlos, and his own sage-enhanced senses, which could feel the faintest stirrings of life and emotion, dove deep into the spoiled, rotten soul of the man before him. It was a cesspool of petty cruelties, gluttony, and lust, but beneath it all, Naruto found what he was looking for. Fear. Mountains of it. A deep, primal terror of being weak. A pathetic, screaming insecurity born from a life without struggle or merit. A desperate need to feel powerful because, deep down, Charlos knew he was utterly, hopelessly pathetic. Naruto drew on that. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He spoke, and his voice, infused with the barest whisper of sage chakra, was a key unlocking every locked room in Charlos's mind. You're afraid, Naruto said, his voice a soft murmur only Charlos could hear, yet it felt like a thunderclap inside the celestial dragon's skull. You're terrified that without your father's name, you're nothing. You wake up every morning and look in the mirror and see a weak, soft boy who has never earned a single thing in his entire life. Every person who bows to you, you know they hate you. You can feel their disgust. It eats at you, doesn't it? That's why you have to hurt them. That's why you have to take and break and own. Because it's the only way you can feel real. The only way you can silence the voice in your head that whispers how small you are. Each word was a perfectly aimed blow. He wasn't using a genjutsu. He was simply speaking the truth. A truth so potent and so deeply buried that hearing it spoken aloud was like being vivisected. Charlos's piggy eyes went wide. His jaw trembled. The world he had built for himself, a fantasy of his own divinity, was crumbling to dust around him. Naruto had seen the pathetic, weeping child hiding inside the monster, and he had dragged it out into the light. No, Charlos whimpered, his bluster evaporating. Yes, Naruto continued, his voice relentless. You're not a god. You're just a scared little man in a fancy suit. And you are nothing. Saint Charlos's face contorted. A strangled sob escaped his lips. His legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees, his fishbowl helmet clattering on the stones. He curled into a ball, weeping. Not crocodile tears of frustration, but the racking, soul-shattering sobs of a man who had just been forced to gaze into the abyss of his own worthlessness. Naruto hadn't laid a single finger on him. He had utterly broken him with a handful of words. The plaza was dead silent. The Marines, the bodyguards, everyone stared in stunned disbelief. They had just witnessed a god being brought to his knees without a single act of violence. Naruto turned. away from the sobbing celestial dragon, and walked to the terrified nurse. He knelt down, his expression gentle. "Are you okay?" She could only nod, tears of relief now mixing with her fear. He gave her a reassuring smile, helped her to her feet, and then turned to the assembled Marines. His eyes were hard as diamonds. "This is not justice," he said, his voice ringing with an authority that had nothing to do with his rank. "This is not order, it's tyranny, and it ends." He turned and began to walk away, leaving a weeping god, a squadron of shell-shocked Marines, and a profound, world-altering silence in his wake. From the edge of the plaza, Hina and Tashigi had watched the entire exchange. Hina's cigarette had fallen from her lips, forgotten. Tashigi's hands were clasped over her mouth, her eyes wide with awe. He hadn't hit him. He hadn't used some grand, explosive power. He had used clarity. Empathy as a weapon. He had defeated the untouchable symbol of the world's corruption with the truth. As Naruto approached them, his face was grim. He knew what he had just done. It was an act of rebellion far greater than anything in Alabasta. It was the final straw. But as he looked at Hina and Tashigi, at the dawning comprehension and awe in their eyes, he knew he wasn't alone. Hina stepped forward, her choice made. She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm and resolute. On his other side, Tashigi did the same, her hand smaller but just as certain. They didn't need to say anything. In that moment, standing together in the heart of a system they were about to shatter, they were a unit. The cage, the sword, and the sun, and deep beneath the holy land of Mary Geoise, in a sterile, forgotten sub-level known only as the Sanctuary, a final sequence engaged. Cryo mist hissed, venting from a sleek, black sarcophagus. The seal unlocked with a heavy, metallic thud that echoed in the cold, dead air. The lid slid open. A tall, gaunt figure sat up, his movements stiff after centuries of slumber. His skin was pale as bone, his hair white as snow. He wore simple, archaic robes. He blinked slowly, his eyes adjusting to the low light. They were the color of a starless, midnight sky. Vacant, empty. They were eyes that held no light, no warmth, no emotion. They held only a purpose, cold and absolute. Arbiter Silas took his first breath in 800 years. And on the edge of his nascent senses, he felt it. A flare of unnatural, heretical energy, bright and golden and utterly offensive to the perfect, silent order of his existence. His first word, a dry rasp in the tomb-like silence, was a promise. Abomination. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Sound of Silence. The calm that followed Naruto's confrontation with Saint Charlos was more unnerving than any open declaration of war. The celestial dragon was whisked away, his mental breakdown classified as a sudden and unfortunate illness. The official story was that the fleet sovereign had calmed an agitated noble with his unique diplomatic skills. It was a lie so thin it was transparent, a paper-thin veil over a chasm of outrage. The 5 elders were silent. Sakazuki was silent. The entire upper echelon of the world government seemed to be holding its breath. Waiting. Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi were still confined, but their confinement felt different now. The invisible walls were still there, but within them, the space between the three of them had changed. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, solid understanding. They ate together in Naruto's quarters, Hina's strategic mind and Tashigi's earnest idealism flanking Naruto's steady presence. They didn't speak of a relationship, not in words. They didn't need to. It was in the way Hina would pass him a report with their fingers brushing, a silent acknowledgement. It was in the way Tashigi would laugh at one of his dumb jokes, her eyes bright and unguarded. It was in the way Naruto would simply sit between them, a quiet anchor, his presence a comfort to them both. They were a triad, and in spoken truth, a unit forged in defiance. The waiting ended a week later. It wasn't an order or a summons. It was an alarm, a frantic, high-priority emergency signal B. read through Marineford's command center. Naruto was on his balcony, deep in meditation, when he felt it. Not just through the alarm, but in the world itself. It was a wave of pure, unnatural quiet spreading from a point in the grand line. It was the same feeling he'd had before, the patch of nothing he had sensed on the edge of the world, but now it was a gaping wound. He felt thousands of life signatures. Bright and vibrant one moment, simply, cease. They didn't die. They didn't fade. They vanished. He was moving before the door to his quarters burst open. Hina and Tashigi stood there, their faces grim. "It's G2, Hina said. Her voice tight. The entire base just went dark. All communications, all life signs from their monitoring posts, gone. G2 wasn't just any base. It was a fortress, one of the most formidable in the Grand Line, commanded by the famously shrewd and powerful Vice Admiral Kamal. It was home to over 10,000 of the Marines' finest, including a high concentra Chion of devil fruit users and seasoned hockey masters. For it to go silent without a single distress call was not just impossible, it was unthinkable. Moments later, a grim-faced officer arrived, his salute shaky. "Fleet Sovereign Uzumaki, the 5 elders have lifted your censure. You were ordered to take your personal unit and investigate G2 immediately. You have full operational authority." Naruto's eyes narrowed. Personal unit. They were sending him, Hina, and Tashigi. The 3 people they had just censured. It wasn't a reinstatement. It was a leash. They were pointing their rogue weapon at an unknown threat. A convenient way to solve one problem with another. "Get our ship ready," Naruto ordered the officer, his voice hard as stone. He looked at Hina and Tashigi. "It's a trap. They're sending us in blind." "Of course they are," Hina said, her expression cold. "Whatever did this to G2, they think it might be able to do the same to you. Then let's not disappoint them," Naruto said, a flicker of his old defiant grin returning. Their transport was a state-of-the-art, high-speed frigate, a vessel usually reserved for admirals. As they sliced through the waters of the Grand Line, the atmosphere on board was thick with dread. The crew, hand-picked loyalists who had served under Hina, moved with a quiet efficiency, but their eyes kept darting towards the horizon, towards the RVing silence on their communications array. As they drew closer, Naruto stood on the prow of the ship, his eyes closed, his sovereign's coat whipping in the wind. Hina and Tashigi stood behind him, a silent guard. "What do you feel?" Tashigi asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Nothing," Naruto replied, his voice grim. "That's the problem. It's not just silence on the Den Den Mushi. It's a hole in the world. My senses can usually feel life, energy, the very pulse of the island itself. But G2, it's just a blank spot. A void." The island that housed G2 base finally came into view. It was a large, mountainous island. The fortress itself carved into the rock, its cannons pointing silently at the sea. There were no signs of battle. No smoke, no fire, no wreckage. The ships in the harbor were all moored, their sails furled. Looking pristine, it was a perfect picture of a base at peace. But the utter lack of movement, the absence of a single flag fluttering in the breeze or a single sailor on a deck, made it the most terrifying landscape Hina had ever witnessed. It was a ghost island. They docked, the sound of the gangplank lowering onto the stone pier unnaturally loud. Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi walked onto the island alone, ordering the crew to remain on the ship, ready for a fast departure. The air on the island was heavy, still, and cold. The silence was absolute. There were no seabirds, no insects. Not even the rustle of wind through the palm trees. It was a silence that felt manufactured, imposed. As they stepped further onto the island, Naruto felt the nothingness wash over him. It was a strange, disorienting sensation, like cotton being stuffed in his ears, but for his soul. His ability to sense life energy, his greatest sensory tool, was gone. He was blind. "My observation haki is gone," Tashigi murmured, her hand resting on Shiger, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I can't feel a thing." "Hina's cages," Hina said, flexing her fingers. "I can feel my power, but it feels sluggish, distant." This was the nature of the void. It wasn't just suppressing their senses, it was actively dampening their abilities. They walked into the main courtyard of the base. The scene was chillingly mundane. A half-eaten meal sat on a table outside the mess hall. A dropped rifle lay on the parade ground. A stack of papers had been scattered by a long dead wind. It was as if 10,000 men had simply evaporated in the middle of their daily routines. There were no bodies, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Just a profound and terrifying absence. "Where is everyone?" Tashigi whispered, her voice trembling slightly, and then they saw him. He was standing in the center of the courtyard, his back to them, looking up at the stone face of Vice Admiral Kamal carved into the mountain. He was tall and gaunt, his white robes unstirred by any breeze. "It is a monument to a false order," the figure said, his voice calm, articulate, and carrying across the silent courtyard with unnatural clarity. He turned slowly. His face was pale, his features sharp and aristocratic, but it was his eyes that seized them. They were black pits, devoid of light or reflection. They were the eyes of the void itself, a symbol of a world drowning in the heresy of power. It was the man from the cryopod. "Arbiter Silas, who are you?" Naruto demanded, stepping forward. He couldn't feel any power from the man, no haki, no devil fruit aura. He was just there, a hole in reality wearing a man's shape. "I am the Arbiter," Silas said, his gaze sweeping over them, lingering for a moment. Tashigi and Hina's devil fruit-infused energy and Tashigi's haki-rich spirit before finally settling on Naruto. His empty eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Ah, you, the great anomaly, the source of the loudest noise. A symphony of stolen energy in a single, offensive vessel. What did you do to the people of this base?" Hina asked, her voice cold and steady, though a knot of pure dread was tightening in her stomach. "I offered them purification," Silas replied, his tone that of a patient teacher explaining a simple concept. "Their aberrant energies, the chaotic whims of the sea devils, the arrogant assertion of will you call haki, they are a corruption of the pure, physical form. A disease. I simply cured them." He gestured to the empty base. "I have unmade their power, returned them to a state of perfect nullity. They are gone, as they should be." He hadn't killed them, he had erased them. The concept was so monstrous, so alien, that it took a moment to even comprehend. "You're a monster," Tashigi breathed, drawing Shiger. The blade hummed with her outrage, her armament haki flaring to life around it. Silas looked at the dark energy coating her sword with an expression of mild distaste. "Another symptom of the disease. The belief that your will can impose itself upon reality. A futile gesture." He moved. He didn't run. He glided, covering the 50 feet between them in a silent, fluid motion. Tashigi lunged, her blade slicing through the air, aimed directly at his heart. It was a perfect strike, empowered by her righteous fury. The blade stopped. It was inches from his chest, frozen in midair as if it had hit an invisible wall. The black sheen of her haki flickered, sizzled like water on a hot pan, and then vanished. The sword was just a sword again. Tashigi stared in horror, her arm trembling with the effort of pushing against nothing. "See," Silas said calmly, "your will is meaningless here." Hina acted instantly. "Bind," she yelled, thrusting her hands forward. Black, cage-like bars of iron shot from the ground, attempting to encircle Silas. But as they neared him, they didn't shatter. They dissolved. The iron warped, softened, and flowed away like black water, unmaking itself before it could even touch him. Her power was useless. Naruto's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a sudden, terrible understanding. The nothingness wasn't a passive field. It was an active, hungry power. The power of nullification. "Get back," Naruto yelled, shoving both women behind him. He dropped into a low fighting stance, sage mode flaring to life around him. The natural energy of the island, faint and suppressed as it was, still answered his call. Silas's empty eyes fixed on him, a flicker of genuine interest in their depths. "That is a different energy. Not of the sea, not of the will. It is of the world itself. It is ancient, primal, but it is still a corruption. An unauthorized power." Naruto didn't waste time on words. He vanished, reappearing in front of Silas, his fist cocked back. This wasn't a playful spar. This was for keeps. He threw a punch powered by sage energy, a blow that could shatter mountains. Just like with Tashigi's sword, his fist stopped, a mere inch from Silas's face. The vibrant, golden aura of his sage mode sputtered and died around his arm, the natural energy he had gathered dissipating into the void. Silas hadn't even flinched. "Your strength is borrowed," Silas said, his voice a low monotone. He raised a hand, his fingers outstretched, and gently tapped Naruto's chest. It wasn't a punch, it wasn't a strike, but the moment his fingers made contact, Naruto felt a sensation like his soul was being unplugged from the universe. The sage mode, his connection to the natural world, was severed. The vast reserves of Kurama's chakra, a roaring sun inside him, were suddenly unreachable, locked behind a door he couldn't even feel anymore. All his power, all his energy, everything that made him him, was gone. He was left with nothing but his own physical body, his own mortal strength. He felt small. Then Silas punched him. It was a simple, straightforward blow, with no wasted motion. But it was delivered with the cold, brutal efficiency of a being who had spent centuries mastering the pure, physical art of combat. The punch slammed into Naruto's stomach, and the air left his lungs in a sharp, agonizing gasp. He was thrown backward, tumbling through the air, his body screaming in protest. He landed hard, skidding across the stone courtyard, the impact rattling his bones. Pain. It was a raw, shocking sensation. He hadn't felt pain like this in decades. Not since his earliest days as a clumsy genin. Hina and Tashigi cried out his name, their voices laced with panic. They started to run towards him, but a look from Naruto, a sharp, desperate shake of his head, stopped them. They couldn't fight this thing. They would just be erased. Naruto pushed himself up, coughing, a trickle of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. He looked at his hands, trying to summon a flicker of chakra, a Rasengan, even a simple clone. Nothing happened. His hands were just flesh and bone. What you are feeling now is purity, Silas said, walking slowly towards him. The state of all things before the heresies took root. No crutches, no stolen divinity, just muscle, bone, and the inevitable decay. He was in the zone of nullity, a field projected by Silas where all anomalous powers ceased to exist. Devil fruits, Haki, even his own sage of six paths chakra. It was the ultimate counter, the perfect anti-power. For the first time in this new world, Naruto Uzumaki was genuinely on the defensive. He was bleeding, he was weakened, and his enemy was a monster of a completely different breed. But as Silas approached, Naruto's fear, the shock, the pain, it began to recede, replaced by something else. Something buried deep in his DNA, a lesson learned through 1,000 losing battles as a child, 100 impossible fights as a shinobi. It was the Uzumaki tenacity, the will of the underdog. He couldn't use his powers. Fine. He had faced worse odds. You talk too much, Naruto grunted, spitting a glob of blood onto the stones. As Silas reached him, Naruto exploded into motion. No chakra-enhanced speed, just pure, explosive muscle memory honed over a lifetime of combat. He ducked under a sweeping kick, his body moving low to the ground. He came up inside Silas's guard, his movements raw, unrefined, but brutally effective. He wasn't the elegant fleet sovereign now. He was the street-brawling knucklehead from Konoha. He drove his shoulder into Silas's stomach. He followed up with a sharp elbow to the ribs, a headbutt to the chin. The blows were solid, physical, carrying none of his usual godlike force, but they were real. They were connecting. Silas was surprised. His movements were perfect, economical, the result of centuries of theoretical practice. But Naruto's were chaotic, unpredictable, born from real-world brawls and desperate life or death struggles. It was the difference between a textbook and a street fight. For a few precious seconds, Naruto had him. He was landing blows, forcing the arbiter back. Silas's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something other than calm disdain, annoyance. Insolent insect, Silas hissed. He weathered a blow to the jaw, and his hand shot out, grabbing Naruto's wrist in a grip of iron. He twisted. There was a sickening crack. Naruto yelled, a raw cry of pain as his wrist fractured. Silas used the momentum to slam him face first into the stone ground. He pressed a knee into Naruto's back, grinding him into the unforgiving courtyard. Your physical struggles are admirable, for a primitive, Silas said, his voice cold and close to Naruto's ear. But you cannot resist the coming silence. From the sidelines, Hina and Tashigi watched in horror. Their god, their anchor, the invincible sun of their world, was being broken. He was bleeding, his arm was bent at an unnatural angle, and he was pinned. The sight ignited a fierce, protective inferno in both of them. Their earlier disagreements, their own fears, they all burned away, leaving only one singular purpose: protect him. Tashigi saw an opening. While Silas was focused on Naruto, his guard was open from the side. Her haki was gone, but her sword was still steel, and her arm was still strong. She charged, not with a fancy technique, but with a desperate, two-handed downward slash aimed at Silas's neck. Silas didn't even turn. Futile, he murmured. A small, localized bubble of nullity expanded from his body. Tashigi's sword passed through it and simply stopped. The kinetic energy vanished. It was like trying to cut water. At the same time, Hina acted. Her powers were weak, but not gone. She couldn't form cages, but she could still manipulate her body. Her arm stretched, becoming a long, thin drill of black iron, shooting towards Silas's exposed back. The drill point hit the same invisible field and dissolved into black dust. It was utterly hopeless, but it was the distraction Naruto needed. While Silas was effortlessly negating their attacks, his focus was split. Pinned to the ground, his body screaming, Naruto did the one thing Silas didn't expect. He relaxed. He stopped fighting the knee in his back. And with his good arm, he clawed at the ground, his fingers digging into the dirt and loose stones of the courtyard. He wasn't trying to draw on sage energy. He was just getting a handful of rocks. With a final, desperate roar, he twisted his body, ignoring the searing pain in his broken wrist, and threw the handful of dirt and pebbles directly into Silas's face. It was the oldest, cheapest trick in the book. Silas, a being of immense power who hadn't had a real fight in 800 years, flinched. His head jerked back, his perfect composure broken for a split second as grit filled his eyes. That split second was everything. The pressure on Naruto's back lessened. Naruto exploded upwards, not with a punch, but with a full-body tackle, driving his shoulder into Silas's midsection. It wasn't a chakra-fueled blow. It was pure, desperate, physical force. The impact surprised Silas. His feet, planted to deliver a final, purifying blow, were knocked from under him. For the first time, the Arbiter was off balance. Naruto's purely physical, energy-based attack had done what Haki and Devil Fruits could not. It had landed. Silas was thrown back a few feet, stumbling to regain his footing. He wiped the dirt from his face, and when he looked up, the calm disdain in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. He had been touched. He had been knocked back. The purification was proving more difficult than anticipated. You have earned a swift end, Silas stated. His zone of nullity beginning to expand, the air growing colder, heavier. But Naruto wasn't pressing the attack. He was scrambling backward, towards Hina and Tashigi. Run, he yelled, cradling his broken arm. Now, he grabbed them, his good arm pulling them along, and they sprinted back towards the docks, leaving the Arbiter standing alone in the silent, empty courtyard. Silas watched them go. He could have pursued. He could have expanded his nullification field and erased them from existence. But he didn't. He touched the spot on his chest where Naruto's shoulder had hit him. There was no damage, but he could still feel the phantom impact. The anomaly was more resilient than his archives suggested. This required re-evaluation. The heresy is strong in that one, he murmured to the silent air. It will need to be burned out at the root. He turned and faded back into the shadows of the ghost base, the silence closing in behind him. Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi didn't stop running until they were back on the frigate, the gangplank being raised behind them. The ship's engines roared to life, pulling away from the ghost island at maximum speed. On the deck, Naruto finally collapsed against the railing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain from his wrist was a white-hot fire. He was pale, covered in dust and his own blood. Hina and Tashigi rushed to his side. Tashigi, her medical training kicking in, immediately began to examine his arm. Hina stood over him, a fierce, protective sentinel, her eyes scanning the receding island, her hands clenched into fists. They had seen their god bleed. They had seen the man who could shatter fleets and topple tyrants brought low by a pale man with empty eyes. And it had changed everything. The awe they felt for his power was gone, replaced by a raw, visceral terror for his safety. He wasn't an invincible deity. He was a man who could be hurt, a man who could be broken. Tashigi gently splinted his wrist, her touch surprisingly steady. His power, she said, her voice strained. It just turns everything off. Not everything, Naruto rasped, looking at the scrape on his knuckles from his brawl. He had landed a few hits. They weren't powerful, but they were real. He can't turn off a fist. He can't nullify a rock to the face. Hina looked at him, her expression a mixture of fear, fury, and a dawning terrible respect. He had been stripped of everything that made him a legend, beaten and broken, and he was already analyzing, strategizing. He was looking for a way to win. He's a ghost from the void century, Hina said, her mind piecing it together. The sanctuary, the arbiter, this is a weapon the elders have kept hidden. A weapon to enforce their true order. Naruto met her gaze, his own eyes burning with a new, cold fire. The game had changed. This wasn't about pirates or corrupt warlords anymore. This was about the very foundation of the world they lived in. Their true enemy was a silent, walking void, a relic of a forgotten age, unleashed by the very people they were supposed to serve. He looked down at his broken wrist, at the blood on his clothes. He looked at Hina's fierce, worried face and Tashigi's gentle, determined hands. This was the first time in this world he had been truly, soundly beaten. And in that defeat, everything became clear. The board was set, the enemy was revealed, and he was not going to run again. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Heresy of the Holy Land. The retreat from G2 was a silent, grim affair. The frigate cut through the waves at maximum speed, its crew moving with a hushed reverence, stealing glances at the fleet sovereign. He sat on the deck, his back against the mast, his magnificent white coat draped over his shoulders like a shroud. Tashigi had set and bandaged his broken wrist, her movements precise and gentle, but the damage was more than physical. For the first time since arriving in this world, Naruto Uzumaki looked tired. Not just physically exhausted, but weary to his very soul. The golden, sun-like energy that usually radiated from him was muted, withdrawn. He had faced gods and monsters, beings of unimaginable power. But he had always been able to fight back, to connect, to understand. Silas was different. How do you connect with a void? How do you reason with an ideology that considers your very existence a disease? Hina stood at the ship's railing, a lit cigarette held tight in her hand, the smoke whipping away in the wind. She watched him, her heart a cold, tight knot in her chest. The sight of him, so powerful and vibrant, being beaten and bloodied by that thing, had shaken her to her core. Her cynicism had always been a shield, a way to manage the world's inherent cruelty. But seeing Naruto, the one man whose hope was infectious enough to pierce that shield, so utterly neutralized, had filled her with a cold, protective fury she had never known. Tashigi sat beside Naruto, not speaking, just being a quiet presence. She was re-wrapping the grip on her sword, Shiger. The fight, or rather, the non-fight, had been a brutal lesson. Her haki, her swordsmanship, her very will, all had been rendered meaningless. It was a profound violation of her warrior's code. But her frustration was dwarfed by her concern. She looked at Naruto's pale face, the dried blood on his temple, the weary slump of his shoulders. She had always seen him as a force of nature. Now, she saw the man. And her heart ached for him. It wasn't your fault, Naruto said quietly, his voice raspy. He hadn't opened his eyes. Both women looked at him. You both did the right thing, he continued. You tried to create an opening. You tried to protect me. A small, tired smile touched his lips. Guess we're even. It was ineffective, Hina stated. Turning from the rail, our powers are useless against him. Hina's cages, Tashigi's haki, they are nothing to him. Not nothing, Naruto corrected, finally opening his eyes. They were still blue, but the usual brilliant sparkle was gone, replaced by a deep, contemplative stillness. They were a distraction, and a distraction was enough to land a hit. A very small hit, he admitted, flexing the fingers of his good hand, but a hit nonetheless. He's not invincible, he just changed the rules of the game. The game is unwinnable, Hina countered, her pragmatism flaring. His zone of nullity is absolute. Inside it, he is a master of combat, and we are disarmed. You were lucky to escape with your life. Luck is a part of skill, Naruto replied, his voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. He pushed himself up, wincing as he put weight on his injured arm. He's not a devil fruit user. He's not a haki master in the traditional sense. That power of his, it's something else. Something older. You said it yourself, Hina. A ghost from the void century. The arbiter. The sanctuary. He walked to the ship's rail, looking out at the churning sea. We can't beat him with force. Not head on. Not yet. So we have to beat him with knowledge. We need to know what he is, where he comes from, and what his weaknesses are. If he was made, he can be unmade. His words hung in the air. A declaration of intent. He wasn't retreating. He was regrouping. The psychological blow he had suffered was already healing, being replaced by a familiar, stubborn resolve. The world government will never give us that information, Tashigi said, joining them at the rail. They're the ones who unleashed him. Then we won't ask them, Naruto said, a dangerous glint returning to his eyes. Hina, your intelligence network, the whispers, the back channels, the things Cypher Pole doesn't want anyone to hear. I need you to dig. Dig for anything related to Arbiter, Sanctuary, or any mention of a silent purge from before the Void Century. Hina nodded, her mind already racing. It was a near impossible task, digging for information that was likely scrubbed from history 800 years ago. But it was a concrete goal, a problem to be solved. Hina will begin at once. Tashigi, Naruto turned to her. You're the historian. You know the official texts, the public records. I need you to look for the gaps. The inconsistencies. Look for stories of heroes or villains whose powers suddenly vanished. Look for battles that were won without explanation. The government erases history, but they always leave fingerprints. Tashigi's eyes lit up with purpose. This was a challenge she was uniquely suited for. A quest for knowledge, a hunt for the truth hidden between the lines. I'll start with the archives at G1. They have some of the oldest pre-government texts. Good, Naruto said. They'll expect us to lick our wounds. They'll expect us to be afraid. We're going to use that time to find the weapon that can kill their ghost. They didn't return to Marineford. It was no longer a sanctuary, it was the heart of the enemy's territory. Instead, they made for G1, a bustling marine base known for its vast library and its more moderate, less dogmatic commander. Under the guise of recovering and filing a special intelligence report, they established a new base of operations. The next few weeks were a blur of clandestine activity. Hina vanished into the smoky backrooms and hidden communication dens of the Grand Line's underworld. She called in Avors from informants she hadn't spoken to in years, traded secrets, and moved through the shadows like a wraith. Her fuchsia suit was replaced by dark, unassuming cloaks. She was no longer just Vice Admiral Black Cage. She was a master spy hunting the biggest secret in the world. Tashigi buried herself in the G-1 archives, a dusty, cavernous library filled with scrolls and tomes that smelled of aging paper and forgotten ink. She cross-referenced naval battle logs from centuries ago with banned historical texts, searching for whispers of their enemy. She worked tirelessly, fueled by black coffee and a burning need for answers. Her spectacles perched on her nose, surrounded by towering stacks of books. Naruto, meanwhile, focused on healing. His body recovered quickly, a testament to his Uzumaki lineage. But the true healing was mental. He meditated for hours on end, not trying to reach out with his senses, but turning them inward. He replayed the fight with Silas in his mind 1,000 times. He analyzed every movement, every micro-expression. He explored the sensation of having his chakra severed, trying to understand its mechanism. Was it a barrier, a drain, an absolute negation? In his meditations, he discovered something. When Silas's nullity field had touched him, it hadn't destroyed his chakra. It had simply disconnected him from it. Kurama was still there, a roaring furnace of power deep within his soul. But the pipeline, the connection that allowed him to draw on that power, had been severed. It was like a key turning in a lock. This meant Silas's power had a limit. It was personal. It affected the individual, not the energy itself. It also meant that if he could find a different pipeline, a different source of energy. His thoughts turned to sage mode. Silas had called it an unauthorized power, distinct from Haki or devil fruits. It was drawn from the natural world, from the planet itself. Silas's S-field had dampened it, but it hadn't been as absolute as the effect on his chakra. It was like trying to cup water in your hands, some of it inevitably slips through. What if he could open the floodgates? What if he could draw on so much natural energy that Ilas's personal field would be overwhelmed, like a single bucket trying to bail out the ocean? It was a theory, a dangerous one, but it was the first glimmer of a real strategy. The breakthrough came from Hina. She appeared in their makeshift headquarters late one night, looking exhausted but with a triumphant, dangerous light in her eyes. She placed a small, encrypted Den Den Mushi on the table. Hina has found something, she said, her voice low. A source, an old revolutionary, a historian obsessed with the Void Century. His name is Cleo. The world government captured him 5 years ago. They didn't kill him. They buried him. Where? Naruto asked, leaning forward. The deepest level of Impel Down. Level 6. The Eternal Hell. A heavy silence fell over the room. Impel Down was the world's most impenetrable prison. Breaking someone out of level 6 was not just impossible, it was suicide. But there's more, Hina continued, her voice grim. Cleo isn't just any revolutionary. He was the right hand of Monkey D. Dragon. He's considered one of the most dangerous men alive, not for his strength, but for what he knows. Tashigi looked up from a scroll she was reading, her face pale. He revolutionary army. There are enemies. The world government is trying to kill us with a ghost from the past, Naruto said, his voice hard. The lines are getting a little blurry, don't you think? If this man Cleo has answers, I'm going to get them. Hina, can you get us in? Hina's lips curved into a rare, sharp smile. Getting in is difficult. Getting someone out of level 6 is impossible. But Hina has always enjoyed a challenge. Quote, the plan was insane. It relied on stealth, misdirection, and Naruto's unique, often underestimated skills. They wouldn't assault Impel Down. They would sneak in. Using his transformation jutsu, Naruto disguised himself as a visiting vice admiral making a routine inspection. Hina, using her legitimate authority, forged the paperwork. Tashigi, her face a mask of nervous tension, played the role of his aide. It was a high-wire act with no safety net. The oppressive, humid heat of Impel Down was a shock to the system. The screams of prisoners, the smell of despair and stagnant water, it was a living nightmare. Naruto kept his cheerful, vice admiral, persona plastered on his face, but his sage senses, muted as they were by the thick sea prism stone walls, felt the crushing weight of suffering in this place. It made his skin crawl. They moved through the levels under the escort of the prison's staff, Hina's flawless paperwork and Naruto's disarming charisma smoothing their path. The true challenge was level 6. Access was strictly forbidden, but Hina's plan was elegant. She created a diversion, a riot on level 4, instigated by an agent she had paid off months ago. As alarms blared and the bulk of the prison's guard force rushed to contain the chaos, Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi slipped away. Using Naruto's ability to phase through solid objects, a high-level skill he rarely used, they bypassed the locked gates and descended into the cold, silent darkness of the eternal hell. Level 6 was a tomb. The most infamous criminals in history were here, their presences like dying stars, faint, but still radiating immense power and malice. They ignored the catcalls and threats from the cells, focusing on the coordinates Hina had memorized. They found I am in a cell at the far end of the level. The man known as Cleo was ancient, his body withered, his hair a long, white mane. He was chained to the wall, but his eyes, when he opened them, were startlingly clear and intelligent. Vice Admiral Black Cage, he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. And, my, the fleet sovereign himself. To what do I owe this unprecedented visit? Have you come to watch me rot? We've come for information, Naruto said, phasing through the cell bars. He knelt in front of the old man. We need to know about the arbiters. Cleo's eyes widened. A slow, dry chuckle escaped his lips. So, they finally let one out of its cage. I knew this day would come. The final solution of tyrants. You know what they are, Hina stated. I know what the stories say, Cleo corrected. The stories that were scrubbed from history. The arbiters were the judges of the 20 kingdoms that founded the world government. Beings who did not possess the cursed power of the sea devils, but a divine power from the gods they claimed to serve. The power of nullity. The power to unmake the abilities of their enemies, to return them to the state of powerless mortals, ready for judgment. He looked at Naruto. They were Imu's ultimate enforcers. The living symbols of the celestial dragon's divine right to rule. They silenced any who opposed them during the Great War, and in doing so, created the Void Century. The pieces slammed into place. Silas wasn't just a weapon, he was a living relic of the world government's true, tyrannical founding. A walking, talking embodiment of their absolute, divine authority. The stories say there was a weakness, Cleo continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The Arbiters' power was absolute, but it was personal. It emanated from them. They were not gods. They were conduits. And a conduit can be overloaded. It can be broken. Overloaded with what? Naruto asked, his heart pounding. His theory. With the one power they could not nullify, Cleo whispered. The one power that is not given, or taken, but is simply, is. The power of the world itself. The voice of the sea, the spirit of the earth, the energy of the sky. The ancients called it many things. To them, it was a power as divine as their own. To you, I believe you call it natural energy. Naruto stared at the old man, a fierce, brilliant hope igniting within him. It was true. His path was the right one. Why are you telling us this? Tashigi asked from outside the cell, her voice laced with suspicion. You're a revolutionary. Cleo's gaze softened as he looked at her. Because, my dear captain, the man who stands before you is not just a marine. He defied the elders to save a kingdom. He humiliated a celestial dragon to save a single nurse. He is not a dog of the government. He is an agent of liberation, whether he knows it or not. The enemy of my enemy, and perhaps, something more. He turned his sharp gaze back to Naruto. My knowledge comes at a price, fleet sovereign. Get me out of this hellhole. Naruto didn't hesitate. Done. He placed a hand on the old man's chains, ready to phase them off. Stop. The new voice was deep, gravelly, and full of the smell of cigar smoke. They spun around, standing at the entrance to their corridor, his jeet resting on his shoulder, his face a mask of grim determination, was Vice Admiral Smoker. And behind him, an entire platoon of elite marine guards. Hina cursed under her breath. A leak, or worse, a trap. Smoker, she said, her voice dangerously low. What is the meaning of this? I could ask you the same thing, Hina. Smoker growled, his eyes hard. He looked from her to Tashigi, and then to Naruto, kneeling inside the cell of the world's most wanted historian. The evidence was damning. I received an anonymous tip that a rogue vice admiral and her accomplices were attempting a prison break. I didn't want to believe it. His gaze was filled with a bitter disappointment. He and Hina had been rivals, friends. For years. The Gorosei were right about you. About all of you. You're a cancer in the Marines, and I've been sent to cut you out. Behind him, through the upper levels of the prison, the unmistakable sound of a buster call alarm began to blare. 10 warships were converging on their position, ready to annihilate the entire island to prevent their escape. The 5 elders had not been idle. While Naruto's group was hunting for answers, the Gorosei had been moving their own pieces. They had used Cipher Pole to monitor Hina's communications, anticipating her every move. They had leaked the tip to Smoker, a man whose rigid, unwavering sense of justice they knew they could manipulate. They weren't just trying to stop Naruto, they were using this opportunity to publicly brand him and his followers as traitors. Naruto stood up, stepping out of the cell. He faced his old friend and rival, Smoker. This wasn't an enemy like Crocodile or a monster like Silas. This was a good man, a fellow Marine, standing on the opposite side of a line that had been drawn in the sand by others. Smoker, you have to listen to me, Naruto said, holding up his hands. You're being used. The elders are the real traitors. Save it, Uzumaki, Smoker snarled, clouds of smoke beginning to billow from his body. I've been given my orders. You are to surrender immediately and face judgment. Resist, and we will use any means necessary to contain you. The threat was clear. He was authorized to kill them. The political trap had been sprung. They were cornered in the deepest part of hell, with an old friend leading the charge against them, and a fleet of warships ready to wipe them from the face of the earth. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Twin Typhoons. The bowels of Impel Down became a pressure cooker. The wail of the Buster Call alarm was a screaming death sentence, echoing off the cold stone and steel. The elite guards behind Smoker raised their rifles, the click-clack of safeties being disengaged a sharp final sound in the tense air. In his cell, the old historian Cleo simply closed his eyes, a grimly resigned expression on his face. He had gambled and, it seemed, lost. Smoker stood firm, his body already beginning to lose its solid form, churning into dense white smoke. His eyes, hard and uncompromising, were locked on Naruto. Last chance, Uzumaki. Surrender. Naruto looked at Smoker, a man he respected, now forced into the role of his executioner. He looked at Hina, her face a mask of cold fury, her hands already preparing to form her cages. He looked at Tashigi, her hand gripping her sword, her knuckles white, her expression a turbulent mix of fear and defiance. They were trapped, a two-front war brewing around them. Smoker's force in front, a Buster Call fleet above, and the very walls of the prison their cage. But in that crushing pressure, Naruto felt a strange, sudden clarity. The elders wanted him branded as a traitor. They wanted him cornered and eliminated. They had orchestrated this perfectly. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed he would play by their rules. Smoker, Naruto said, his voice dropping the pleading tone, becoming calm and resonant with authority. You're a good man. You believe in justice. But the justice you're serving right now is a lie. You're a puppet, and the Gorosei are pulling your strings. I follow the orders of the world government. Smoker roared, lunging forward, his arm transforming into a massive tendril of smoke. White blow. The attack wasn't aimed to kill. It was meant to capture, to pin Naruto down. But Naruto didn't dodge, he didn't block, he simply took a deep breath, and a wave of pure, untainted sage chakra, drawn not from the dead stone of the prison but from the very core of the planet far below, erupted from his body. It was a golden, benevolent aura, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness of level 6. The smoke tendril hit the aura and dispersed, not with a sizzle of nullification, but as if it had run into a gentle but immovable wall. Smoker's eyes widened in shock. Hina, Naruto said without turning. The guards. Tashigi, the walls. Cleo, stay behind me. His commands were not suggestions. They were statements of fact. The time for stealth and politics was over. Hina didn't hesitate. Cage lock, she snapped. A lattice of black iron bars erupted from the floor and ceiling. Not to trap Smoker, but to form a perfect, impenetrable cage around his elite guards, separating them from the fight. They slammed against the bars, their rifles useless. Tashigi understood her role instantly. While Naruto held Smoker's attention, she was the key to their escape. She drew both Shigure and the Sandai Kidetsu. Two-sword style. Rosin. She yelled, spinning like a top, her blades extended. She wasn't a whirlwind of destruction. She was a drill. Her hockey-infused swords bit into the thick, sea-prism stone-laced wall of the prison, carving a deep, perfect circle. Naruto faced Smoker alone. I don't want to fight you, old friend, he said, his golden aura pulsing. You made your choice. Smoker growled, his entire body exploding into a storm of smoke that filled the corridor. He was everywhere at once, tendrils lashing out from all directions. Naruto didn't move. He closed his eyes. Sage art. Amphibian kata. He wasn't just sensing Smoker's movements. He was sensing the natural energy around Smoker's intangible form. The smoke displaced the air, and Naruto's senses, connected to that very air, gave him a perfect, three-dimensional image of his opponent. He moved. His fists and feet lashed out, not at the smoke, but at the empty spaces within the storm. Each blow was precisely aimed, carrying a halo of sage energy that struck Smoker's real, physical body. No matter how dispersed it became, it was like punching a ghost. Smoker reformed, staggering back, a trickle of blood at his lip. How? You're a part of the world, Smoker, Naruto said calmly. And right now, I'm listening to everything it has to say. He raised a hand, and a Rasengan, burning with the golden light of natural energy, spun to life in his palm. Stand down. This is your last warning. Behind them, Tashigi gave a final, mighty heave. The circular section of the wall groaned and fell away, revealing not rock, but the dark, churning waters of the calm belt. Impelled down was a submerged tower. They had breached the hull. Now, Hina yelled, dissolving her cage. Naruto didn't throw the Rasengan. He let it dissipate, his point made. He grabbed Cleo, whose eyes were wide with disbelief, and bolted for the opening. Hina and Tashigi were right behind him. They leapt through the hole into the frigid, dark water. As the sea rushed into level 6, Smoker stood frozen, watching them go. He could have pursued, but he had been utterly, effortlessly defeated. And Naruto's words echoed in his mind. You're a puppet. He looked at his trembling hands, the Buster Call alarm still screaming. And for the first time, he felt a bitter seed of doubt take root. The moment they hit the water, Naruto's power exploded. Summoning jutsu, he roared, slamming his palm against the water's surface. The sea boiled, and from the depths rose Gamabunta, the colossal chief of the toads, as big as a battleship, a pipe clamped in his massive mouth. Naruto, you finally call, and it's in the middle of the ocean. You've got some nerve, the giant toad grumbled. Sorry, chief, need a ride, fast, Naruto yelled, helping everyone onto Gamabunta's broad, warty back. From the surface, the 10 marine warships of the Buster Call fleet spotted them. Target acquired, a voice boomed over their loudspeakers. All ships, open fire. A terrifying volley of cannonballs, hundreds of them, rained down from the sky. Aimed to obliterate them, Naruto simply pointed a finger at the sky. Sage art. Massive Rasengan barrage. It was a miniature version of the spectacle in the calm belt. 100 clones appeared in the air, each with a Rasengan. They didn't hit the cannonballs. They hit the water directly in front of them. The resulting explosions created a colossal wall of water, a tsunami that rose up and absorbed the entire volley. The cannonballs sank harmlessly into the sea. Before the fleet could reload, Gamabunta took a single, chakra-fueled leap. He soared through the air, clearing the entire Buster Call fleet in one monumental bound, landing in the water miles away, and then he was gone, disappearing beneath the waves, leaving 10 state-of-the-art warships staring at an empty patch of ocean. The escape from Impel Down would go down in history as an impossible, legendary feat. But for Naruto, it was just the opening move. As they made their escape, a new crisis was erupting. Taking advantage of the chaos, of the news that the fleet sovereign himself was now a wanted fugitive, the world's most opportunistic pirate crew made its move. Marshal D. Teach, the man known as Blackbeard, had decided the time was ripe to carve out a bigger piece of the world for himself. His target, G1, the very base where Naruto's allies were unknowingly waiting. The attack was a brutal, overwhelming shock. Blackbeard's fleet, led by the colossal flagship Saber of Zebek, materialized from the mists and opened fire without warning. The G-1 base, a strategic hub but not a frontline fortress like Marineford, was caught completely off guard. Explosions rocked the island. The base commander, a decent but outmatched vice admiral, was struggling to mount a defense. His forces were in disarray. Blackbeard's commanders, the monstrously strong Jesus Burgess, the sickly and sinister Doc Q, the sharpshooter Van Augur, and the sadistic Katarina Devon, were rampaging through the outer defenses. Ziahahaha. This is it, boys. The dawn of a new era. The era of Blackbeard. Teach's laughter boomed across the island, a sound of pure, unrestrained avarice. He stood on the prow of his ship, his 2 devil fruit powers crackling around him. Darkness swirled from one hand, while the other seemed to warp the very air with the power of the quake fruit. The situation was desperate. It was about to become a massacre. Miles away, aboard Gamabunta, who was now swimming at an incredible speed just beneath the surface, Hina received a frantic, broken message on her private Den Mushi. G1, under attack. Blackbeard, the whole fleet, were being overrun. The message cut out. Hina's face went pale. Her people, her network, all the loyal Marines who had helped them, who had trusted her. They were being slaughtered. Naruto, she said, her voice tight with anguish and fury. Blackbeard is at G1. Naruto's head snapped up. His brief moment of relief after their escape vanished, replaced by a cold dread. He had been so focused on the elders, trapped that he hadn't seen the jackal coming to feast on the chaos. It was his fault. His actions had created this opening for Teach. Gamabunta, change of plans, he yelled. Get us to G-1. And I mean now. You're a real slave driver, you know that. The toad grumbled, but he altered his course, his powerful legs propelling them through the water at an even more astonishing speed. They surfaced a few miles from the island, and the scene was apocalyptic. The G-1 base was wreathed in smoke and fire. The sounds of battle echoed across the water. Blackbeard's fleet had formed a blockade, their cannons pounding the shoreline defenses to rubble. Naruto looked at the unfolding disaster, his mind racing. He was one man. He couldn't be everywhere at once. He couldn't fight Blackbeard and save the base at the same time. He was caught between his duty to stop a Yonko and his need to protect the people his choices had endangered. Then he looked at Hina and Tashigi. Hina's face was a mask of cold fury, her eyes fixed on the battle, her mind already calculating firing arcs and enemy positions. Tashigi stood beside her, her hand on her sword, her posture radiating a fierce, unwavering resolve. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. He had been thinking like a lone hero. But he wasn't alone anymore. "I have a plan," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the roar of battle. He turned to them, his expression one of absolute, unwavering faith. He placed a hand on Hina's shoulder. "Hina, you are one of the finest tactical minds in the entire Marines. You know naval combat better than anyone. I'm giving you command." He created a dozen clones. They weren't for fighting. They were for crewing. They summoned a sleek, fast Marine E-scout ship they had borrowed earlier, bringing it to the surface. "Take this ship," Naruto continued, his eyes burning with intensity. "Take my clones. They'll follow your every order. Break his blockade. Save the base. Show them what true strategy is." He then turned to Tashigi, his gaze just as intense. "Tashigi, the Marines on that island are terrified. They're broken. They need a symbol. They need a leader to rally behind. Your sword, your spirit, that is true justice. Get to the front lines. Lead the charge. Hold the line until Hina can break through. Show them what a real Marine fights for." He was splitting his forces. More than that, he was placing his absolute, unequivocal trust in them. He wasn't giving them orders. He was empowering them. Hina stared at him, speechless. As handing her command of a naval battle against a Yonko's fleet. The responsibility was immense. The trust it implied was staggering. A fire she hadn't felt in years ignited in her chest. "Hina will not fail." Tashigi's heart swelled. He wasn't sending her to fight. He was sending her to lead. To be the beacon of hope she had always wanted to be. "I won't let you down." "I know," Naruto said with a confident grin. "As for me," he looked towards the island, his eyes zeroing in on the hulking figure of Blackbeard, who was just stepping onto the shore. "I'm going to have a little chat with the man in charge." He didn't wait for a reply. He vanished in a yellow flash, streaking across the water towards the heart of the storm. The battle for G1 split into two distinct, epic conflicts. On the sea, it was a masterclass in naval warfare. Hina, aboard her scout ship, crewed by a dozen silent, efficient Naruto clones, became a phantom of vengeance. She didn't engage the Blackbeard fleet head-on. She used her ship's superior speed and maneuverability to harass, to provoke, to lead them into traps. She directed her clone crew to use small-scale water-style jutsus, whirlpools, water jets, to disable rudders and foul cannons. She used her own cage fruit in brilliant, unexpected ways, firing sea prism stone-tipped spars from the cannons that, upon impact, allowed her to manifest cages at locked down entire sections of enemy ships. It was tactical jujitsu, using the enemy's size and strength against them. The Yonko's fleet, built for overwhelming force, found themselves being dismantled piece by a single, untouchable ghost. On the island, it was a battle for the soul of the Marines. Tashigi landed on the beach and charged directly into the fray. She was a whirlwind of steel and conviction. She met Jesus Burgess, a man of mountainous strength, not with power, but with superior skill, her blades weaving a web he couldn't break through, her movements precise and fluid. Her presence was a lightning rod. The beleaguered G1 Marines, seeing a captain fighting with such fearless valor, found their courage again. They rallied to her, their lines reforming, their morale surging. "For true justice," became their battle cry, echoing across the battered shoreline as they pushed back against the pirate invaders. And in the center of the island, a god met a demon. Naruto landed in front of Blackbeard. the ground cracking from the force of his arrival. Ziahahaha. Naruto Uzumaki. Teach boomed, his grin wide and predatory. The fallen hero. Come to die on this forgotten scrap of rock. I've come to take out the trash. Teach, Naruto said, his sage mode flaring to life, his coat whipping around him. The battle was cataclysmic. It was a clash of absolute, opposing forces. Blackbeard's darkness, his yami no mi, sought to devour everything. He created black holes that swallowed the light, that pulled Naruto towards him with irresistible gravity. But Naruto's sage mode, his connection to the world, was an anchor. He stood firm, the golden aura a sun that refused to be extinguished. Kurozu. Vortex. Blackbeard roared, unleashing his ultimate gravitational pull. Naruto didn't resist. He flew towards it, but at the last second, he used it, whipping around the vortex like a planet slingshotting around a star, building up impossible momentum. He emerged from the spin, his fist cocked back. Sage art. Lariat. The blow, powered by his sage-enhanced strength and the momentum from the vortex, was devastating. It slammed into Blackbeard's jaw with the force of a meteor. The massive man was sent flying, crashing through a line of palm trees. Teach staggered up, laughing, blood dripping from his mouth. Ziahaha. Good. That's the spirit. He slammed his other hand onto the ground. Shima Urashi. The entire island shuddered. The ground cracked and split, shockwaves erupting from Blackbeard's fist, threatening to tear G1 apart. But Naruto was already in the air, his hands forming a familiar sign. Sage art. Tailed beast ball Rasenshuriken. He combined the ultimate attack of a tailed beast with the ultimate evolution of his own jutsu. A miniature black sphere of dense chakra, surrounded by a spinning, screaming shuriken of wind and natural energy. It was an attack that could vaporize mountains. He hurled it at Blackbeard. Teach's eyes went wide with genuine fear. He brought both hands up, unleashing his darkness and his quakes simultaneously, creating a swirling vortex of nullifying gravity and shattering space to meet the attack. The two ultimate techniques collided. The result was not an explosion. It was a moment of absolute, terrifying silence. Light and darkness, creation and destruction, cancelled each other out in a sphere of pure, chaotic energy. The island was spared, but both men were thrown back, panting, the sheer power of their exchange having drained them. It was in that momentary stalemate, as Naruto prepared to press his advantage and overwhelm Blackbeard for good, that the world went cold. The nothingness returned. The zone of nullity. Arbiter Silas stepped between them as if from a tear in reality itself. He had been drawn by the sheer, heretical energy of their battle. Two anomalies, he said, his voice a dead, flat thing amidst the chaos. Two cancers on the face of the world. How convenient. You shall be purified together. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. Naruto's sage mode sputtered and died. The golden aura vanished. His connection to Kurama, to the world, was severed. He was mortal again. Blackbeard fared even worse. The darkness swirling around him vanished. The quake, power fizzled out of existence. His two devil fruits, the source of his immense power and arrogance, were simply gone. He stared at his hands. A look of pure, unadulterated terror on his face. My power. What did you do to my power? He shrieked, his bravado utterly shattered. I have cured you, Silas said, his empty eyes fixed on them. The three of them were locked in a tense, chaotic triangle. Two fallen gods and a walking void. Silas began to glide towards Naruto, seeing him as the greater, more ancient heresy. Blackbeard, stripped of his power and faced with a monster he couldn't comprehend, did the only thing a man like him would do. He ran. But Naruto saw his chance. It wasn't about beating Silas now. It was about survival. It was about sending a message. As Silas advanced on him, Naruto didn't back away. He charged, not at Silas, but past him, towards the retreating, terrified Blackbeard. He moved with a raw, desperate physicality. Silas, surprised by the unexpected move, turned to intercept. It was a feint. At the last second, Naruto planted his foot and spun, his body low to the ground. He drove his good shoulder and arm forward in a brutal, purely physical lariat, the same move he had used on the Raikage years ago, but stripped of all its lightning and chakra, powered only by muscle and desperation. The blow caught Silas, who was still turning, on his side. It wasn't enough to truly hurt him, but the raw, kinetic force of it, a physical impact his nullity field couldn't stop, sent him stumbling. It was the second time a purely physical attack had broken his perfect defense. Naruto used the momentum to disengage, putting distance between himself and the two monsters. Blackbeard, seeing his chance, didn't hesitate. He scrambled back to his ship, screaming orders for a full retreat. Silas, momentarily thrown off balance and now enraged by the insects' defiance, stabilized himself. His cold fury now absolute. But the moment was gone. The battle was over. Blackbeard's fleet was in disarray, thanks to Hina. His commanders were being beaten back, thanks to Tashigi. And Naruto had managed to injure Silas and drive back a Yonko, all while powerless. In the aftermath, standing on the battered deck of the G1 command tower, Naruto looked out at the retreating pirate fleet. His allies, Hina and Tashigi, came to stand beside him, their faces smudged with soot, but their eyes shining with victory and relief. Naruto looked at them, then at the captured Den Den Mushi communication array on the tower. He knew what he had to do. The elders had declared war on him. It was time he returned the favor. He picked up the transponder, a technician clone quickly modifying it to broadcast on every marine, government, and public channel across the globe. He took a deep breath. "This is Fleet Sovereign Naruto Uzumaki," he began, his voice calm, steady, and carrying an unshakable weight. He didn't sound like a fugitive. He sounded like a king. "For too long, we have served a lie. We have been told we fight for justice, but we have been the enforcers of tyranny. The five elders, and the shadow master they serve, Amu, do not care for the people. They care only for their power. They unleashed a warlord on his own people. They tried to have me, and my loyal officers, executed for stopping him. And today, they unleashed an ancient horror upon the world, a being known as the Arbiter, Silas, whose only purpose is to erase those who defy them." His voice echoed fr. "Own Den Den Mushis in palaces and taverns, on warships and in revolutionary hideouts." The entire world was listening, captivated. "I will no longer be a party to this corruption. My loyalty is not to the celestial dragons. It is not to the world government. My loyalty is to the people. To every man, woman, and child who wishes to live in a world free from fear." He looked at Hina and Tashigi, who watched him with awe and unwavering support. "Effective immediately, I am renouncing my title and my allegiance to the world government. But I am not abandoning my duty. I am announcing the formation of a new force. We are the True Justice Marines. And our mission is simple: to protect the people, from pirates, from tyrants, and from the corrupt gods who sit on their hollow thrones. To any Marine who still believes in true justice, I say this: join us. The war for the dawn has begun." He set the transponder down. A declaration of global civil war. He had just set the world on fire. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Dawn of the Sovereign. The world did not just fracture, it shattered. Naruto's broadcast was a spark thrown into a powder keg, and the resulting explosion was deafening. Entire populations on islands brutalized by pirates or neglected by the world government rose up in open support. Pirate crews, smelling chaos and opportunity, went on a rampage. The Revolutionary Army, while officially silent, saw a seismic shift in their favor. But the most significant fissure ran through the heart of the Marines. Naruto's words, backed by his unimpeachable record of heroism, forced every soldier, from the lowest-ranking ensign to the highest-ranking admiral, to make a choice. Was their loyalty to the institution, or to the ideal of justice it was supposed to represent? The results were immediate and stunning. Vice Admiral Smoker, having witnessed Naruto's impossible escape and heard the truth of the Buster Call, publicly declared his allegiance to the True Justice Marines, taking the entirety of the formidable G5 base with him. His justification was simple and broadcast for all to hear: "I follow justice, not corrupt old men hiding in a castle." Admiral Fujitora, the blind swordsman, who had long been at odds with the government's policies, made his choice by dropping a meteorite on a fleet of cipher pole ships sent to reason with him. He and his loyal forces formally seceded, joining Naruto's cause. Figures like Kobe, Helmeppo, and even some of the more disillusioned vice admirals followed suit. It wasn't a majority, but it was the heart and soul of the Marines. The ones who believed in protecting people over protecting systems. The world government, led by a furious Sakazuki and a silent, calculating Gorosei, consolidated its power. The remaining warlords were called to Marineford. The full might of Cypher Pole was unleashed, not against pirates, but against their former comrades. The world was split in two, a global civil war brewing, with the Red Line itself as the inevitable battlefield. Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi established their new headquarters on a neutral, heavily defended island, a nexus point for the defecting forces. It was a whirlwind of activity. Hina, in her element, became the de facto supreme commander, her tactical genius transforming a disorganized collection of rebels into a cohesive, disciplined military force. She coordinated fleet movements, established supply lines, and directed intelligence operations with a chilling efficiency. She was no longer just Black Cage, Hina, she was the architect of a revolution. Tashigi became its heart. She moved among the newly arrived soldiers, her passion and unwavering belief in their cause a balm to their conflicted souls. She trained with them, listened to their fears, and reminded them why they had made their stand. She wasn't just a captain anymore, she was the conscience of their new army, the living embodiment of the true justice they fought for. Naruto was their son. He didn't bog himself down with logistics or politics. He moved among his new allies, a beacon of overwhelming power and disarming humility. He trained with Kobe, pushing the young man's haki to new heights. He debated the nature of justice with Fujitora over cups of tea. He sparred with Smoker, their rivalry now a bond of mutual respect. He was the gravitational center of their new world, a leader who commanded loyalty not through fear or rank, but through genuine connection and an unshakable belief in his people. The quiet moments the three of them shared were rare and precious. Late at night, on a balcony overlooking their bustling naval base, the war would fall away. Naruto would stand between them, Hina leaning against his right side, Tashigi against his left. They would watch the stars, their hands intertwined, a silent, unshakable trinity. They were no longer just a man and the two women who loved him. They were a unified command, their strengths perfectly complementing each other. Naruto the inspiration, Hina the strategy, Tashigi the spirit. The final confrontation was inevitable. Their intelligence, gathered by Hina's network and confirmed by Cleo, the revolutionary historian they had freed, was clear. The Gorosei were consolidating their power at Mary Geoise. And deep within the Holy Land, Arbiter Silas was gathering strength, his zone of nullity expanding, preparing to unleash a final world-spanning purification. We can't wait for them to act, Naruto said during a war council, his voice echoing in the chamber filled with his new commanders. We can't win a war of attrition. They have more ships, more resources. We have to cut the head off the snake. We're taking the fight to them. We're going to Mary Geoise. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. A direct assault on the Holy Land of the Celestial Dragons, the most heavily fortified location on the planet. But as Naruto laid out his strategy, a plan built on Hina's tactical brilliance and his own unique abilities, the impossible began to seem achievable. The dawn of the final battle broke, blood red, over the Grand Line. A massive fleet, flying a new flag, a stylized sun with a sword and a cage intertwined within its rays, sailed towards the Red Line. At the head of the fleet was the flagship, the Unwavering Will, with Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi standing on its prow. As they approached the colossal Red Continent, the world government's armada appeared to meet them. It was a terrifying sight, hundreds of warships led by the combined might of Fleet Admiral Sakazuki and the remaining loyal admirals, Kizaru and Ryokugyu. So, the traitors have come to die, Sakazuki's voice boomed across the water, amplified by a Den Mushi. We've come to liberate the world, Sakazuki. Naruto roared back, his voice infused with sage chakra, carrying across the waves with equal force. From you. The battle that followed was the stuff of legends. Hina's genius was on full display. She didn't engage the enemy fleet head-on. She used Fujitora's gravity powers to lift entire sections of the sea, creating temporary walls of water to block cannon fire. She had Smoker's forces act as a smokescreen, their Logia powers creating a massive, disorienting fog of war. Her own cages, deployed by ships scattered throughout the fleet, weren't used to trap men, but to foul rudders and lock down cannon batteries, crippling the larger, less maneuverable government battleships. She was playing chess while Sakazuki was playing checkers. Tashigi led the charge. Her personal vessel broke through the enemy line, her goal not the enemy fleet, but the Red Line itself. She, along with Kobe and a vanguard of elite swordsmen, was tasked with establishing a beachhead on the continent. She met Kizaru, the man of light, in a dazzling duel. She couldn't match his speed, but her observation haki, honed by her time with Naruto, allowed her to predict his movements, her blade a blur of defensive steel that held the line against an admiral, inspiring every soldier who saw her. Naruto sought out the biggest threat. He flew towards Sakazuki's flagship, a golden comet of righteous fury. The two clashed in a battle that boiled the sea around them. Magma fists the size of islands met recentricans that screamed like souls torn from their bodies. It was absolute justice versus true justice, an ideological war made manifest in a maelstrom of fire and energy. But all of this was just a prelude. As the battle raged, a cold, dead silence began to emanate from the top of the Red Line. The zone of nullity was expanding. Silas appeared, floating down from Mary Geoise like a fallen angel. He no longer looked like a man. His form was less distinct, his edges blurring into the void around him. His power had grown. He was no longer just nullifying powers in his immediate vicinity, he was projecting a field miles wide. Devil fruit users across the battlefield suddenly faltered. Smoker's smoke dissipated, Fujitora's control over gravity wavered. Even Sakazuki's magma seemed to cool and slow. Haki became sluggish and unreliable. Panic began to ripple through both fleets. The heresy is loud today, Silas's voice echoed, not in their ears, but in their minds. A voice of cold, final judgment. It is time for silence. He was targeting everyone. His purpose was not to help the world government win. It was to erase the entire concept of anomalous power from the world. Hina, Tashigi, get everyone you can out of the field. Naruto yelled, breaking away from his fight with Sakazuki. He flew towards Silas, his body a golden streak. He had to draw his fire. He entered the zone of nullity, and as before, his chakra connection was severed. His sage mode sputtered, but this time, he was ready. He didn't try to fight it. He didn't try to force a connection. He simply let it go. He let his own power be stripped away, and he opened himself up completely. He reached out not with his chakra, but with his very spirit. To the one power Silas couldn't touch. The raw, inexhaustible life force of the planet itself. Cleo's words echoed in his mind. A conduit can be overloaded. Natural energy, raw and untamed, poured into him. It was a raging, roaring torrent, far more than he had ever tried to handle at once. His body screamed in protest. This was not the gentle, balanced sage mode. This was him becoming a living channel for the world's fury. His skin cracked, golden energy bleeding from the fissures. His eyes glowed with the brilliance of a supernova. What is this? Silas asked, his calm demeanor finally breaking as he felt the sheer, overwhelming scale of the energy Naruto was channeling. This is not authorized. This is not possible. You're just a parasite, Silas, Naruto grunted, his voice a low growl, distorted by the power coursing through him. And the world is tired of being your host. He didn't form a Rasengan. He didn't throw a punch. He simply raised his hands, and the very ground of the Red Line answered his call. The colossal continent of Red Earth, the symbol of the world government's power, began to tremble. Great spears of rock, each the size of a warship, erupted from the ground. Infused with the golden light of natural energy, they shot towards Silas, not as projectiles, but as extensions of the planet's own will. Silas's nullity field struggled. It erased the first spear, the second, the 10th. But the assault was endless. For every spear he unmade, 100 more took its place. He was trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. Impossible, he shrieked, his form flickering as his power was stretched to its absolute limit. You wanted silence, Naruto roared, a final, cataclysmic wave of energy pouring through him. Then be silent. He brought his hands together, and the very ground beneath Mary Geoise tore open. The holy land, the sacred ground of the gods, was ripped asunder. Silas was caught in the epicenter. He was not just attacked by a force, he was overwhelmed by a concept. The concept of life itself, infinite and indomitable. His zone of nullity, his entire being, was consumed by the roaring, golden tide of natural energy. His final scream was not of pain, but of pure, abject confusion. And then he was gone. The void was filled. The silence was broken. As Silas vanished, the oppressive field across the battlefield disappeared. Powers returned with a sudden, jarring rush. But the fight was over. The sight of Mary Geoise being torn apart by a man burning like a star, the sight of their ultimate weapon being annihilated, had broken the world government's will. Sakazuki stared in horror, his magma dying down, his belief system shattered. The Gorosei, watching from their now crumbling chambers, were captured by Smoker's forces. The being known as Amu was nowhere to be found, having vanished like the shadow they were. The celestial dragon's reign was over. Naruto fell from the sky, the borrowed power leaving him. He was caught before he hit the sea by Gamakichi, who had been waiting for his call. He was exhausted, broken, but alive. The war was won, but the world was in chaos. The power vacuum was immense. The future was more uncertain and dangerous than ever before. Days later, the sun rose over the now broken red line, its light shining through the great rents Naruto had torn in the continent. He stood on a newly established precipice, looking out at the dawn of a new, uncertain age. He was no longer a marine, no longer a sovereign. He was just a man who had kept his promise. Hina came to stand at his right, her presence a solid, grounding weight. Her fuchsia suit was gone, replaced by the dark, practical uniform of a supreme commander. She looked at the fractured world, not with fear, but with the sharp, calculating eyes of a builder ready to work. Tashigi stood at his left, her hand resting on her sword. Her uniform was battered, but her posture was straight, her eyes clear and full of a hope that now seemed not naive, but necessary. She was a guardian, ready to defend the fragile peace they had fought so hard to win. Naruto looked at them, the two pillars of his new world, the cage and the sword that gave his son purpose. A tired, genuine smile touched his lips. The victory was not an ending. It was a beginning. A terrifying, beautiful, and uncertain beginning. He took both their hands, his grip firm. "Well," he said, his voice quiet but filled with an infinite, unshakable resolve. "Now the real work begins." Chapter 7 End.